Welcome back to another live stream. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm making sure I don't have the volume all the way up at the start as I usually do. So incrementally, we're getting slightly more professional. So, yeah, I hope everyone is doing well. I'm going to cover a few things first, but then we're going to dive into the main topic of today's stream, which I'm sure you're all here for. So let's first go over what we're going to be doing this stream, and then I'm going to quickly cover some things before we actually dive into it. So welcome Kartik and Tobias in the chat. If you're watching, please say hello in the chat. Obviously not mandatory, but it's just nice to see who's hanging around. Cool. So today we're going to be checking out this video. I investigated the human extinction movement by Timmy 2 Cents. Now, this is an hour-and-a-half video, which, to be honest, as you could have seen in the title of the stream I did put it in, didn't I? Yeah, I kind of suggested that it's almost like I haven't watched it. This is a fresh reaction, but I skimmed through it, and it kind of, it comes across a bit as like, it's almost like a sort of quasi-documentary or documentary. So yeah, that's the video we're going to be watching. Now, it was put together by this guy, Timmy 2 Cents. Now, so this is his channel. Obviously, there's the most recent video. Now, this is sort of like his second channel. The main channel he has is this one, which has a lot more subscribers, around 150,000, GOAT. And this is sort of, a second channel of his, right? So now a bit of backstory about this. So a while ago, I honestly can't remember how long ago now. Welcome to the chat, Void Occupant. I honestly can't remember now how long ago it was, but a while ago, Tim reached out to me and said, I'm putting together a video on anti-natalism, or I want to put a video together on anti-natalism. And I want to speak to a few, a sort of cross-section of anti-natalists. Do you want to have a chat? So we spoke, and yeah, he asked me all his questions, my opinion about such and such, and how do I understand anti-natalism and the community and all sorts of stuff. It was a while ago, so I forget all the questions he asked me, but it was a relatively thorough conversation. And he did the same with a bunch of other anti-natalists, as far as I'm aware. Now, this isn't a big point, but I mean, maybe I'm misremembering, and maybe you did tell me, but I thought that actually my conversation with him was mainly just like research. I didn't actually expect to or think I'd get a mention in the actual video, but I sort of I briefly appear in it. So exciting times. I am looking forward to getting stuck into it. It came out tomorrow originally. So we're only a day late reacting to it. So I reckon that's pretty pronto. So I think that's everything out of the way. Before we actually get into it, for those who have not been, keeping up to date on my community tab or post tab, this Sunday just gone, we had an anti-natalist meetup in London, where we did some activism in an area of London called Camden, and we then went for a meal in the evening, and both were very successful. The outreach we did was in a separate location, or a different location to what we usually do.
Children in this world, and
we raise them to be warriors against evil. And we have our first super chat from Bovine Bluestocking. Thank you so much, Bovine. Bovine says, hi everyone. Hey Lawrence, I have a question, but I'm going to save it for the Ask Me Anything fundraiser. By the way, are we nearly there yet? Yes, good mention. So very quickly, to celebrate hitting 5,000 subscribers, which I haven't done yet. At the moment, we're on 4,700. 4.76k. I'm looking at an abbreviated number here, so I don't know exactly what we're on, but 4.76k. So nearly there, just under 250 left to go. So if you're watching and you haven't subscribed yet, smash the subscribe button and we can get to 5,000. And then we'll be doing a Ask Me Anything live stream, or almost anything. And you can submit your questions now already. I will get the link and put it in the chat whilst I am talking. But yeah, so basically what we're going to be doing is you can ask questions. You can submit them ahead of time, which is the form that I'm about to put in the chat. And what you can also do, which is strongly encouraged, is why is it not giving me the option to go to my channel, for fuck's sake? And the okay, YouTube's being a bit of a dick at the moment. It's not giving me the option to go to my channel. Cool. I will get the link in a minute. So yeah, so you can submit questions ahead of time, and you can also I can do it on my phone. Hang on. You can submit questions ahead of time, and you can also donate to the actual fundraiser at the time, which is obviously strongly encouraged because we're raising money. And you can ask me your questions. So I'm putting the link to the form where you can submit your questions ahead of time, free. So get them in there. And I'm hoping, obviously, you know, that we'll hit 5,000 subscribers and do the live stream in the next couple months, hopefully. So, and I wanted to give, you know, an ample amount of time for people to submit their questions and stuff. So yeah, we'll be trying to hit £300. There are a couple of people who have very kindly said, private donors, that will said they will match that. So if whatever we get up to £300 will be doubled. So the maximum we could get within the aim, obviously we can go more, but the aim is £600 that we could do. And it'll all be going to Family Empowerment Media, who are a great charity, and I will leave you to look them up yourselves. But thank you for the reminder, Bovine. And yes, so back to London. So we had a successful day in London. People were very interested. There were some people who would, you know, look at us, give us very weird looks. That's to be expected. And we had one very interesting interaction, which was quite long, and it had different stages to it. But we actually had a few, off the top of my head, 3 people fully signed up anti-natalists bump into us. They were not part of our group. We didn't know who they. Well, actually, I already knew one. He's a friend, but he wasn't part of the group. He just happened to be walking past there randomly. So that's very cool. You know, anti-natalism is still a very rare opinion, but you know, maybe it's more common than we think. I know London, obviously, in the grand scheme of things in the world, is a very liberal city. So you may expect more anti-natalism, but yeah, that was cool. Anyway, so there's a 3-part mini series of videos, outreach videos, which are going to be released soon on my channel over the next couple of weeks, which all come from our day of activism on Sunday. So yes, and then I'll be doing a live stream reaction to all 3 of those back to back, because there's a bit of context and a bit of added stuff I wanted to say about them, so I thought I'd do a live stream. So, okay, I don't think there's anything else to natter about, so I think we can go straight into watching the video. So I've downloaded it. Welcome to the chat, Anna. I've downloaded it, boosted the volume as usual, so hopefully everything's going to be okay. Let me know if not, but I think that is everything. So let's get into it. If you haven't said hello in the chat already, please do. It's always nice to see who's watching, and we'll get into it.
You may remember this scene from It's a Wonderful Life. George Bailey, played by James Stewart, misplaced a large deposit, a huge mistake that would not only put him in legal trouble, but would surely end the business his father started. With no will to survive, he stumbles out in traffic and decides to take a final swim. In George's mind, his life insurance policy is worth more to his family than he is alive. But before he jumps, the man falls into the icy water. George jumps in to rescue him. The man, who claims to be an angel, talks George down from any future bridge jumping activities. And the scene ends with this statement.
I suppose it'd been better if I'd never been born at all.
What'd you say?
I said I wish I'd never been born.
As the film unfolds, we are taught a lesson about the inherent value of life, even amidst suffering and hardship. But is it really true that life is wonderful for everyone? What if I told you that there is a group of people that think George had it right, that he would have been better off if he hadn't existed? And even worse, if you gave them the option to snap their fingers and eliminate all of humanity.
So obviously he's going to get into the red button. I mean, I say obviously, it's only obvious since this bit of the intro. I wasn't aware of this ahead of time. Or maybe he mentioned it when I spoke to him ages ago. But again, don't assume I've retained any knowledge from when I spoke to him, because it was a long time ago and I've forgotten basically all of it. Yeah, I'm sure I've checked out a couple of the comments, and I know from like when I spoke to Tim, like he was coming at this from a good faith place, and I've seen in the comment section of the original video that people were saying like it was nice to see like a balanced video that was considering both sides. So I'm sure he's going to make this distinction, but like obviously here he's speaking in a way, and obviously this is the hook to try and get people to watch the video, obviously. So, you're going to be a bit more fantastical. But obviously anti-natalism, does not include or require someone to, say they'd press the red button or want to end all life on Earth, stuff like this. This is a more fantastical sort of element of, how should we say, like suffering-focused people, of which the anti-natalism community, includes some, or many. So, yeah, but there is that distinction there, obviously, between, anti-natalists and then anti-natalists that also have this additional belief that, we should eliminate all life, in this hypothetical red button, flick of the switch sort of thing.
They would do it. Okay, that was a bit dramatic, but in all seriousness, I found a group of people who prefer all of humanity to not exist. They call themselves anti-natalists, and they're part of a growing...
Okay, I didn't intentionally mean to pause on me, but the person you just saw before, let me see if I can go back to him, because it was literally just... This guy, Danny Shine, he was with us on Sunday. I'm not sure if in any of the pictures I posted he is in there, but yes, Danny was with us on Sunday doing anti-natalist outreach at the meal, so good to see him again here.
Anti-natalists, and they're part of a
and this is obviously yours truly, but also I'm not sure if the guy on the left, I'm not sure if he wants his name public, so I won't say his name, but great guy from Austria. And then on the right is obviously Nimrod, and this shot is from my video that I did with them in Austria when we went to when I joined them in Vienna.
Growing philosophy who ultimately want everyone to stop having kids. We're going to meet some of them and try to understand how anyone could arrive at this alarming conclusion. And I also want to talk to their critics, who are called pronatalists, people who encourage others to have children.
And that's Malcolm and Simone Collins, who myself and my friend John have had a debate with. If you type in, I don't know, anti-natalists, natalist debate, something like that, it should come up. Yeah, we met them in person in London, had a discussion / debate with them. But they live in America, so they're on the other side of the pond now.
Regardless of whether you agree with anti-natalist logic, there is valuable insight to be gained. So take a deep breath. This is an alarming topic with huge implications for most people. When we think of a human life, some picture a pregnant mother glowing with anticipation, young children with bright futures, or perhaps a high school graduation or a young couple in love. Most of us can see the joy in humanity, and while life does have happiness, every life has certain pain and suffering. Some children are born with terminal conditions, like this young girl who will never make it out of childhood.
As a parent, the most important thing to do is to protect your child, and we're told that she has this terminal illness with no cure or treatment.
You know what that woman said there about, you know, as a parent, all you want to do is protect your child. It reminds me of the quote by Benatar of, you know, obviously I'm not going to do it word for word, but it's, you know, good people go to great lengths to protect their children from coming to harm, but don't realize that the only thing and the only guaranteed way of ensuring they come to no harm is just not creating them in the first place. You know, like by creating a child, you're creating someone into a state of vulnerability in a body that is capable of immense pain and suffering and the ability to be harmed, in a world that is ultimately, you know, going to cause harm to them, other people, other things, you know, natural disasters, stuff like this. You know, I don't subscribe to any particular religion. So, you know, I don't think that the universe has any ultimate like purpose for us or anything like this. So the, you know, you're creating someone who's vulnerable to harm into a world that is indifferent to their well-being. So, you know, once you do that, all you can do is mitigate the harm that's going to come to your child, or should I say mitigate the harm that you've put your child in the way of. This is the fundamental tragedy of creating someone, right? Is that you're putting them in harm's way, essentially, and all you can do is try and mitigate the harm they're going to come to the best you can, but you can't do that perfectly. Once you've created them, it's a Pandora's box. You've opened that box. You know, you can't you can't close it again. They will come to harm. All you can do is mitigate it. The only way that you can ensure that someone never comes to any harm is not create them. And it's just so like tragic. I mean, I know often anti-natalism can get, you know, the discussions about it can get highfalutin and disconnected from reality, especially when you start talking about like extinctionism and fucking buttons and shit. Like it becomes so detached from reality. But it's cases like this little girl, right, who make it so real. Like, just don't create someone and you avoid the risk. You avoid the guaranteed suffering and harm and death, but you also avoid the risk of putting someone in this position. I don't know the details of this girl's case, but I'm assuming they're not amazing given he's using her as an example. Maybe she's a famous case and I'm being ignorant. Maybe people in the chat know who she is. But, you know, procreation is just a fucking tragedy, you know? Like, this little girl did not have to go through any of this suffering. And I'm not here to like blame, you know, her parents. And even though I do think they're at fault, but I'm not here to like lambast them and shit like this. You know, at the end of the day, like, they shouldn't have done it. They did do it. You know, now just look after the girl as best you can. And it's just like, fuck, you know, why do we keep repeating this cycle? Welcome to the chat, Louis, Robert, Uluwali, HP, Down, Anna, welcome. Let's keep going.
Or maybe your child will be born with a condition that's not even identified yet. That would take this young teen's life only 6 months after this story was published. He has a disease so rare, doctors don't even have a name for it.
We don't know what the future holds, and that's scary to think about because I have lots of plans, lots of ambition, lots of things that I want to do in life.
You know, this is the thing, like, in fact, one of the conversations I'm going to be posting soon on my channel was with this guy from Sunday in Camden, and basically so he was one of the people that were already anti-natalists, and he came up to us and he was like, hey, you know, I believe the same as you guys, and we start, and you know, I did a bit of an interview with him and spoke with him and stuff. And one of the things he was saying, which is such a tragedy, is that, you know, you create people into a world where they then gain, there's almost this necessity inside them of that they want to do something, pursue something in life. Now, some people can pursue what they want to do, but other people are locked into a life where they have the urge to pursue something and they can't. Whether this is, you know, you want to pursue something which is not deemed by your culture as acceptable, and you live in a very conservative culture, and if you were to pursue it, you know, that, you know, maybe you're criminalized in some way. Slightly separate point is, like, let's say you're born into a very conservative culture and you're gay, right? I'm saying it's slightly separate because, you know, you don't pursue being gay, you just are gay. But it's like, you know, that is the life that is natural for you to lead, right? And that is going to bring you fulfillment, having a loving relationship with someone of the same sex. And you're born into a culture that criminalizes it, you know, denounces it, all of this sort of stuff. So it's like we're creating people into a world where, okay, they could lead a life that they feel fulfilling and they can pursue the things they want to pursue. But that's only then fulfilling the desire you created for them in the first place. There was no point doing that in the first place. But, like, all of that comes at a cost. Like, that's pointless, but it also comes at a cost of all the people that can't pursue what they want to do. And this guy is a case of that, right? Like he said himself, he has things he wants to work on, things he wants to do. And because of the, like, facts of his circumstance, he's not going to be able to do that. And I think Tim mentioned that he died 6 months after this story. And again, it's just like fucking tragic, you know. But yeah, it's a point this guy made on Sunday of, like, you know, we create people into a world where they may want to pursue things that are deeply fulfilling to them, and yet they either lack the capacity or the culture and environment around them isn't friendly to it, let's say.
Never in a million years would it have occurred to me that as a preacher, I might be called to deliver my son's eulogy. Until it hit me a couple years ago that I might have to as his illness progressed. Now, of course, I don't have to. I know other preachers. But when I became a father, I promised myself that my children would get my absolute best. And along with pushing my son's wheelchair all over Kingdom Come and getting him dressed in the morning, what else does my best include except delivering his eulogy? That doesn't mean I know how the hell to do this. How do you deliver your son's eulogy? I'm not here to pretend that we're all happy now because Mitchell is in heaven. In faith, I believe he is with God, but the painful, mysterious, drawn-out, slowly incapacitating death of an incredible young man with such profound gifts in the prime of his life, that is among the most senseless tragedies any novelist could invent. We are not happy. Also, I'm not here to solve the mystery of this situation.
You know, like, obviously, I want to be sensitive because this guy, you know, he's lost his son and stuff, and that's like that's awful. One, for the son, but also for this guy. But it's like there is no mystery to this, you know. Like, well, we've got another
in this world, and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Thank you so much for the donation. I'm not sure why it's coming up like that because I'm pretty sure I fixed that situation. But thank you so much, Xavier. So Xavier says, extinction is painful, how to end life painlessly. Yeah, I mean, Yeah. Extinction. Well, yeah. Any form of extinction is probably going to come with some pain. Yeah. How to end life painlessly. I mean, who knows, you know? There are people working on technologies to help facilitate, you know, for like the right to die and stuff like that. Yeah. I'm not sure how to answer that question. But thank you so much, Xavier, for the donation and the support. What was I saying? Yeah, I just, you know, like, obviously I have sympathy for this guy. But it's also got to be said that there isn't a mystery surrounding this. The reason people come into existence is because we create them. You know, there is not a big mystery around this. And I'm sure there's some psychological mechanisms going on of like trying not to admit, you know, his, you know, contribution to what happened. Obviously he loved his son and he did the best for his son. I mean, I don't know the guy, but I'm assuming, given the way he's talking, but that is one of the tragedies of procreation, is that the people we harm are usually the people we love. You know, usually people love their offspring deeply, and yet they are responsible ultimately for all the harm that their offspring comes to. If you didn't create them, they would not exist to come to any harm. You know? Yes, other people do things to harm your offspring. Yes, your offspring make decisions themselves, but you ultimately put them into the situation where people could make decisions that impact them, or that they could make decisions that hurt themselves, you know? So, yeah, you know, whilst being compassionate and understanding of the pain that parents can go through, and this guy clearly is, we've also got to remember that, like, it's clear where, like, what the cause is. You know, it's clear that those who have caused this to happen are the people who created the children. Again, that's not to demonize them. I don't think that's useful or healthy. But to dress this up as some sort of mystery, I think is a form of escapism, both from reality, but also from your own responsibility for what has happened, basically. And again, I don't want to, you know, I'm not trying to punch down or anything. It's just like, we've got to be clear-minded about this sort of stuff, which obviously it's understandable he's not going to be clear-minded, especially in this situation, because, you know, he's reading his son's eulogy. But yeah, cool. I think I got my point across.
I have never known so many people to be praying so diligently in unison for someone to get better. Mitchell didn't get better. As we prayed, he got worse.
I don't know if this guy is going to take it this way, but I also think this really needs to be confronting to those who are religious and believe that there is a benevolent God, you know? Because yes, you can dress it up in this way of like, there's a benevolent God, but he moves in mysterious ways, and where, you know, everything happens to us for a reason. Well, you know, this just comes across to me as, one, completely unfounded, but also massive cope. And I think the needless suffering of innocent beings, especially when it is at no fault of their own, like the kid who died here, this needs to be confronting to all people who believe in a benevolent God. They at least need to take this seriously.
It felt like a cruel joke. Now, I understand people get sick and die. I understand that.
You know, and it's, again, at some point I will stop pausing so much because I know we need to actually get through the video. But it's like, you know, it's one thing to understand that people get sick and die, and it's another thing to actually act on that, right? You need to accept reality and then use that understanding of reality in your decision making, and realizing that people get sick and die, and then creating a child, that child getting sick and dying, and then dressing up as a sort of mystery. You know, again, I want to be sympathetic, but that just seems ridiculous to me. I'm just going to leave it there because, you know, obviously this guy's in a lot of pain. Well, I don't know when this was filmed, so, but obviously at this point he was in a lot of pain. But yeah, I think people get my point.
But the big problem here is that Jesus assures us that we will receive whatever we ask for in faith, which we did. I don't get it. I don't mean to be rude, but you don't get it. We will continue thinking about the unfairness and the mystery of this for the rest of our lives, but we are not here this afternoon to solve it.
No one's getting out of this game of life alive, and there's a growing community with a definitive solution to this problem. And they argue it's better never to have been. Lucky for me, I have 3 healthy children. No genetic or debilitating chronic diseases for us so far. We were fortunate to have had twins. And
that was actually interesting you said so far, because I was going to pause it and say, well, yeah, they haven't. You know, and obviously completely wish his children well. They look like amazing kids, and, you know, I wish the best for them. But, you know, yeah, you can't make absolute statements like this. You know, like, life can come at you with all sorts of curveballs, which is, again, one of the reasons why we shouldn't be creating people. But, yeah.
10 years after their birth, we decided to try again. And try again we did. This is our youngest daughter. But unlike most parents, our initial glimpse of our baby wasn't captured by an ultrasound machine. In what would have been considered science fiction a century ago, this snapshot was our first introduction to her. She was in a petri dish, incubating before the last step of the in vitro fertilization process, the embryo transfer. Unlike nearly half of all pregnancies worldwide, which are unintended.
Yeah, it's an insane statistic that I mentioned so often, but that's crazy.
IVF pregnancies are just about the most intentional way of having a child. After tens of thousands of dollars, months of hormone treatments, genetic testing, and a minor surgery, my wife was finally done.
Oh, yay, I'm done.
Because luck would strike again. The embryo would implant, and we would have a successful birth on the first try, which is not common. Many things can and do go wrong all the time, but that's the game of life. We don't know what's in store for us. I could have died in my previous career, working as a firefighter, and any one of us could die tomorrow on the way to the grocery store. The truth is, no matter how much we stack the deck in our favor, we don't control our destiny or the destiny of our offspring. And how long will my family continue this streak of serendipity? And was it wrong to bring new life into this world, knowing full well that bad things do happen to good people? And what about the lives of my children? I gave them life, but I also imposed a death sentence on them. They'll be considered lucky if I am not here when they eventually die. And no matter how you look at it, I gambled with their life without their consent. And sure, we screened them for genetic anomalies, but any number of things can happen to them or their environment that are completely out of their control. Can I be sure that they will be better off than to have never been? Did I make a mistake? I sure hope not. And to explore these questions in more detail, I met up with the founder of Stop Having Kids, and we chose Texas, the Lone Star State known for its traditional family values and other values, like the right to free speech.
So let me just go back a tiny bit. So this is Dietz, who helped found Stop Having Kids. I can't remember if Dietz is the sole founder or if there was a co-founder as well. And then this is Nick, who goes by Vegan Equilibrium, sometimes comes in the chat. I'm not sure if he's watching now, but yeah, Nick has done a lot of good stuff, both on animal rights, but also anti-natalism.
Speech.
If you could just stay off to the side,
Sure.
you're more than welcome. You know, I appreciate you guys exercising your First Amendment right, okay? All right, thanks, guys.
And what better time to chat with people
The face of that woman, we got a few of those on Sunday.
about not having children than Mother's Day weekend.
Cool. Keep doing that.
At first, it would seem that the value of free speech would be well respected here in Texas.
That's offensive. The joy I have with my grandchildren are amazing.
Oh my God. The first thing she goes to is, I find your message offensive, you know, making me trying to make me like consider the ethical implications of the actions I've taken. And the first thing she says is, something's been amazing for her. Like, fucking the selfishness of people. And Nick is in the chat, Vegan Equilibrium. So nice job, Nick, being on the I'm just going to refer to it as a documentary, you know, because I don't know if I don't know if Tim would officially class it as a documentary, but fuck it, it's basically one, isn't it? And Anon in the chat says, when is the next anti-natalist meetup? Well, obviously I'm talking about like the UK. The next one, I don't know when it'll be. It'll be around sort of like New Year, Christmas, New Year time. But we haven't got one scheduled in yet. But if you are in the UK, then send me an email. I can add you to the UK community. And yeah, we have semi-regular meetups and do some activism. So cool. Okay, nice one. Let's continue.
And yes, they have a problem. It's through the love of the Lord Jesus Christ and our church and
Oh my God, more cope.
their upbringing of learning right from wrong. That's where it's at.
If you create a soul,
Offensive.
if you create a soul,
offensive.
what about the children that end up in hell?
We need children. We need population. What's wrong with you?
That one was fired up.
I just wanted to see what she was saying.
Oh, she said she was offended.
Yeah, I figured.
Because she's...
It's like, to a degree, like, obviously we shouldn't be going around and intentionally just trying to offend people and upset people for no reason, but being offended also isn't a point, you know, like, so what if you're offended? Like, you know, engage in open discussion or make an argument or something like this, but like just saying you're offended, this, you know, it doesn't really mean much.
Said that children and grandchildren bring her joy. We're not saying anything bad about children. We're just saying to not create new humans, not because of children. It's because of what humans can experience and what humans can cause for others. And why don't we prioritize life that's already here and in need over the unborn? There's so much life here.
Everyone got free speech, so.
Yeah.
Do you, man?
Thank you.
But what happens when one value threatens another in this state that prides itself on protecting fundamental rights?
We're not going to go into measurements. I'm just telling you right now, this is all heritage property. You're not allowed to be at the store. And then if you stand here and do that, now you're impeding the sidewalk.
We've been here for, I don't know, maybe just 10 or 15 minutes, but everyone's been walking through just fine. You've seen that, right?
Yes, yeah. You could stand in stationary, you're considered impeding. Because if somebody wants to walk there, they can't. They'd have to walk around you.
But no one was having difficulty walking around. Did you see us?
That's why I'm here. I just got a phone call.
From the shop owner probably, right?
From their customers coming in the store, yes.
You are offensive.
Just because they don't want us here, but not because we're actually blocking foot traffic, though.
That's what they're saying. So I get y'all keep moving.
Well, where would you suggest we stand?
You're not going to be able to do it. The stock yards.
Yeah, so we can be on the public sidewalk, right?
As long as you're not impeding the sidewalk.
So we can stand over there?
You cannot be stationary. You got to keep moving.
So we can just walk back and
If
forth.
you want to keep walking, you can do that.
We can't even stand against the rails over there?
Not if you're
So
stationary.
I can pace.
And these guys weren't going to be bullied by this neighborhood police officer. So they paced around with their signs.
I already did an hour on the treadmill today, but I'll do more.
Which, if anything, was more effective than what they were doing before. And how on earth could their signs be considered disturbing the peace? Most people in this neck of the woods would likely classify themselves as pro-life.
I am part of pro-life.
For example, the Texas Heartbeat Act was passed a few years ago. It bans most abortions at about the 6-week mark, when fetal heartbeats can be detected, often long before most women know they are pregnant, and certainly long before a woman realizes she's had an unintended pregnancy.
Millions of children lose their right to life every year. Every unborn child who has a heartbeat will be saved from the ravages of abortion.
And I'm not going to get into an abortion debate in this video. But the anti-natalist sees the debate around abortion as missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, exactly, because it's like, when you're talking about abortion, you know, you then constrain to the territory of like, well, it's a life that already exists, and then you're talking about killing, whereas that anti-natalism is separate. You know, like what an anti-natalist would say is like, okay, there are conversations to be had about abortion, but if you're talking about abortion, you're kind of, you know, it's kind of too late for anti-natalism. And which, you know, is not always the case. Obviously, if depending on when you understand a being to come into existence, for me, it would be when they gain sentience. So before then, an abortion would simply be, you know, fulfilling your duty not to bring someone into existence. But once, at least for me, they've gained sentience, then you're talking about a being who already is in existence. So anti-natalism is kind of like, conversation about that is over. You got to move on to a separate conversation. So yeah, and like abortion is part of the conversation around anti-natalism, but it can also be that, you know, it's too late and anti-natalism is by the wayside and you've got to now talk about an existing life rather than not creating one.
In their eyes, all pregnancies are bad, not just the unintended ones. Anyway, back to Fort Worth. This is Dietz, the founder of Stop Having Kids, and we were also joined by Noodles, a fellow anti-natalist activist who, for whatever reason, attracts the religious crowd. He's got to average like 5 or 6
That's so funny.
hands-on prayers per day. And you could say I was curious how this crowd would receive anti-natalism. And while we did have people knocking over signs,
Be a lover, not a hater. This is country town.
You were the one that was spreading hate.
and people were yelling some pretty nasty stuff,
Your mom not have had you? She should have aborted you?
Yeah.
Yeah, she should have aborted
Yeah.
you. She don't deserve to breathe. That's what she don't deserve to be.
I'll pray for
Fucking hell, why do people get so caught up? I mean, so there was a guy on Sunday when we were doing outreach. I mean, yeah, he was drunk, so it's like, you know, drunk people are going to be drunk people, but he was telling someone to kill themselves. He was even saying that he'd help them kill themselves, you know? And it's like, you've never met this person before, and you feel entitled enough to tell them to end their life. Like, who do you think you are? Like, it's just insane people go there straight away. Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know.
For you. We'll pray for you.
I'm saying, bro, I'm trying to leave some unborns on somebody's back.
and a lot of people asked to take photos.
Take a picture.
It was hard to figure out sometimes if people understood what Dietz and Noodles were advocating.
Honey, take a picture.
I sometimes get that as well. When we do activism here in London, we sometimes get people walk past and give us like a woo or like a thumbs up. And I'm not sure they always fully understand what we're talking about. Usually these are people that are like in a rush, which is why they don't stop to talk. But yeah, so it's like it's often hard to clarify to them. But yeah, I agree. I think sometimes people don't necessarily know.
Picture of me.
Like this mother who doesn't quite get it.
As a mother who agrees with this message, what part of it really stood out to you? Like, when did you decide that this is something you really believe in?
Because if you can't take care of your kids on your own, you shouldn't be having them.
Mm-hmm.
And people aren't taking care of their kids and they're not doing what they're supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
They do it without knowing how serious it is.
How serious it is, yeah. They undervalue the suffering that can happen. Right.
And we ran into plenty of people who think antinatalism is just another word for incel or a life of voluntary celibacy.
Howdy.
What does it say your shoes out?
My shoes.
Yeah, you don't need that sign with those shoes on.
Why?
You just don't need it.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Can you explain that to me?
He was criticizing you because of your shoes?
Yeah, is that I don't need this sign with these shoes on. That's
What
what
are
happens
shoes?
when you wear Converse in the South.
And it was really common for
I didn't realize Converse were like politicized in the US. What the fuck?
there to be a person who found the idea fascinating, but the group they came with would drag them away.
They're leaving.
Okay. Yeah, I don't...
Crack.
Okay, no problem.
Good talking to you.
Dad, don't get involved. Don't get involved. Don't video him.
You guys should
Happened.
listen. He brings up good points.
Would you like a condom?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. That's a XL, by the way.
A good number.
What a lad.
People express how they just don't like children, which is sort of missing the mark.
I hate kids. They're nasty. They're sticky.
Yeah, we've had a few people like that. People come over and express a dislike for children, and then we've got to clarify, you know, that's not what it's about. You know, if you want to hate kids, then whatever, have your opinion. But like that, that's not what we're talking about.
Like kids specifically or humans?
Deets and Noodles don't hate children. In fact, they despise bad parents. It's sort of awkward watching someone realize what they're about.
This isn't actually specifically against children. It's about not creating new lives. We believe we should be prioritizing life that's already here and in need over creating new ones.
And some people would just be completely rude, like a scene out of Mean Girls.
I just wanted to make fun of y'all real hard later on.
Oh, yeah?
I needed evidence.
I'd love to hear your arguments against this.
Like this lady, who asked to take a photo and then told Noodles she was going to use the photo to make fun of him later. And I think the most frustrating part for me is I think most people just didn't get what Deets and Noodles were saying.
This is a compassionate movement.
So we actually kind of had this conversation on Sunday about how some of the signs. So the signs we've got, some of the slogans we have are from Stop Having Kids, and some of them are ones we made up ourselves. And we were kind of having the conversation about whether we think some of the signs are a bit too complicated. And honestly, the signs are not that complicated, but a lot of people, let's just say, don't have the bandwidth to understand even relatively basic stuff. So we were kind of talking about how we think we may need to come up with some simpler signs. So if anyone has any ideas, definitely smack them in the chat.
It's not a compassionate movement, it's a selfish movement. World needs more people.
Tell me something. What is one unselfish reason to procreate?
Unselfish reason to think about that. Unselfish reason to procreate.
Because it betters the entire world to bring somebody here.
But is that something you care about?
If we stop yes.
And so that's something you want, right?
Yeah.
So therefore it is selfish, right? You're saying it's okay to use a human as a means to an end, as a utility. Can you name a reason to procreate that is both unselfish and ethical?
Plenty.
Okay.
I'm going to give my life to that child. I'm going to do everything I can to raise that child.
That's bizarre. That's not a reason to create them. That's an obligation you have once you've created them.
Only doing that because they exist, right?
It's my dream when I was a little girl to become a mom one day.
So that's my
yeah, exactly. There we go.
Point. That is a selfish that endeavor.
And I was very...
And it's like, you know, ultimately, like, I don't think I've come across anyone that has made arguments for having kids that are like highfalutin, that when you dig a bit deeper, it's like they just have a personal desire to have kids and they're just trying to rationalize it. Now, that doesn't mean the argument itself is invalid. You know, that it can be an argument that stands on its merits independent of that fact. But at the same time, don't try act like you're having a kid for some grandiose reason. You're having a kid because you want a kid. No one doesn't want to have a child. They're like, you know, I do not want to commit my life to raising a child. But there's just this overwhelming argument, and therefore I'm going to inconvenience myself massively and create the child. No one does that. They have a kid because they want to have a kid.
Very unimpressed with most people's answer to the question, what is one unselfish and ethical reason to have children? The most common response by far was, we need more people. And we can just strike that one down immediately. Any response that starts with I or me or humanity is selfish by definition. It's also selfish to bring children into the world to fund future pensions, retirement plans, or the economy, or to deal with our national debt, not theirs. It's also inherently selfish to bring a child into the world to fulfill your dreams of becoming a parent. And it's also selfish to bring a child into the world to help us become a multi-planetary species, first inhabiting Mars.
The biggest problem the world will face in 20 years is population collapse. I want to emphasize this.
Honestly, the fact that, obviously I know Elon Musk on certain topics is a smart guy, because you'd need to have some level of intelligence to get into the position he's got into. But like, man, I don't know why people look up to him, you know? Like, there are certain things that he's doing that I think, okay, fair enough, you know, that's a decent thing. Like helping the sector to, you know, the automobile sector to move towards more electric vehicles. That seems like an overall good thing. But like, I mean, the biggest issue I have with him is this whole pushing for humanity to go out into outer space. Like, I just don't think he knows, you know, the potential consequences of his actions. I just think I've never seen him speak at all, let alone in a serious way, about the potential downsides of us spreading life to other planets. I'm not remotely convinced that he's thought about that seriously. I think he is drunk on techno-optimism, and in my view, in the long run, his actions are probably going to leave the world in a much worse place. But we shall see. I may be wrong. Who knows? But yeah, honestly, the more I learn about Elon Musk, the less I like him. Yeah.
The biggest issue in 20 years will be population collapse.
Elon may be right that we are going to face some serious problems in the near future. And according to Musk, humanity won't make it off the planet if we don't do something about this impending population crisis. So he's fathered 12 children with 3 different women. And while you might say that parenting requires a lot of money, time, and energy, which can be viewed as selfless, the anti-natalist perspective challenges the very choice to bring new life into the world. From this viewpoint, the act of having children isn't seen as selfless, but rather as imposing existence on someone without their consent. And in Elon's family, they're born with a tremendous to-do list: save humanity. Don't get me wrong, these people seem to be great parents, but anti-natalism is the critique of the act of procreation, the imposition of life, the lack of consent, and the burdens we place and that exist naturally on all new life. Before I headed out from Fort Worth, I had packed up all my gear and I was having a good chat with Deets and Noodles before I left, which is nearly impossible because their signs attract so much attention. And they started a conversation with this guy, and I butted in and asked him the question.
I have been disappointed with people's response to this one question they've been asking me, which is, can you think of a ethical, unselfish reason to have a child?
Give others a chance to do something they're amazing.
The audio is bad, I know. I had put my mics away, but if you didn't catch what his answer was, it was to give someone a chance to do something amazing. And he later clarifies that essentially experiencing life is amazing.
Even one good moment out of this life is something to live for.
Not if you end up in hell because of it.
That's insane. One good moment. So, I mean, this guy is, like, as far as I'm concerned, fucking dangerous. Like, if he has that view, even if he's in a situation where, like, let's say he's in a fucking war zone and he knows that the kid he's going to create is going to just have an awful life, but maybe they're going to have, like, one good birthday. Like, surely he's just talking out of his ass. I don't think he actually means that seriously. He's just, like, spouting thoughtless, optimistic, you know, gibberish, basically. Like, unless you're, like, massively religiously deluded, no one actually thinks that, right? That, like, one good moment makes a life worth creating. Just absolutely inane, optimistic rubbish as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, well, I mean, okay. In fact, I'll do one better. Take Christianity out of it. Like, even if we go in the ground, if you have one good day, they like compared to nothing. Yeah, that's better.
Well, yeah, but they're not going to exist. It's like this guy and me, both of us, neither of us existed 100 years ago. It doesn't even make sense to ask someone, how was your life 100 years ago? Because they didn't exist. You know, they didn't exist to make a judgment either way. He's like imagining that, you know, like there are like ghost fetuses somewhere that are like bored or something or longing to come into existence. And they're like looking down on existence and thinking, oh, if only I could get down there and have that, you know, one good moment, but I'd have all the suffering, but all this sort of stuff. And it's like, this is, as far as we're aware, we've got no good reason to believe that there are ghost fetuses wanting to come into existence. Sorry to break it to everyone, but that doesn't seem to be how reality works.
Maybe this Texan bodybuilder was onto something. He was the first person who gave a selfless reason to create a life. But this answer wouldn't satisfy the stop having kids advocate.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that is a selfless reason, but it's an extremely misguided one. I mean, one, it's not based on an informed view of reality. And two, whatever like amazing thing you're talking about is amazing from the viewpoint of someone who already exists, right? Not from the viewpoint of an individual who doesn't exist, right? So let me give an example. Me having a retirement that is fully paid for and I don't have to put any effort into it sounds amazing to me, right? And so that's like a good thing for me. But to say I'm going to have a child so that they can have a fully paid retirement and they don't have to worry about any of it, that doesn't make sense to me, because the only reason they need that retirement is because you created them in the first place. So by not creating them, you don't create the need, and so there's no reason to then try and generate this value. Like, there's no value perceiver or value receiver that needs this amazing thing you're talking about. The need for the amazing thing or the desire for it is created when you create the person. So there's like a supply and demand problem here, right? You're trying to supply amazing things, but there's no demand for it. So, because in this situation, you haven't created someone, right? So to create a demand for the amazing things that you want to, you know, give somewhere, you have to create someone so that there's a need, so that there's a demand for the thing you want to supply. It makes no sense to me. It sounds like broken moral economics. But I guess that guy's going to do what he's going to do.
Because he didn't answer the ethical question. Should we be creating new life? In the first episode of True Detective, Rusty Cole, played by...
I still need to watch New Detective. I still haven't watched it. It's insane.
By Matthew McConaughey, is being pressed by his partner, Marty, after he learns that Cole isn't a Christian. Marty asks a philosophical question.
But you're not a Christian, so what do you believe?
I'd consider myself a realist, all right? But in philosophical terms, I'm what's called a pessimist. I think human consciousness was a tragic misstep in evolution. We became too self-aware. Nature created an aspect of nature separate from itself. We are creatures that should not exist by natural law.
Well, that sounds god-fucking awful, Russ.
We are things that labor under the illusion of having a self, this accretion of sensory experience and feeling, programmed with total assurance that we are each somebody, when in fact everybody's nobody.
I wouldn't go around spouting that shit I was you. People around here don't think that way. I don't think that way.
I think the honorable thing for our species to do is deny our programming. Stop reproducing. Walk hand in hand into extinction. One last midnight, brothers and sisters opting out of a raw deal.
I mean, I can completely understand why that sounds to most people depressing, but to me, when I hear that, I'm just like, all I hear is sense, basically. But I don't know, maybe I've become radicalized.
And we're familiar with that look. It's perfectly natural. And I'd say we're biologically programmed to feel this way. But it's not an argument. This is Nick Pizzolatto, the writer behind True Detective. He created Matthew McConaughey's character after reading one of the most influential anti-natalist books, Better Never to Have Been, by David Benatar, an academic at the University of Cape Town. Benatar is somewhat of a mysterious person. He has never appeared on camera, and there are virtually no photos of him anywhere, except for an unverified video I found from 2013 with this grainy photo. In interviews, Benatar has refused to answer the question of whether he has children himself. He later revealed that he doesn't, but the point remains. He wants his work to stand on its own merit. It doesn't matter what he looks like or how he's lived his life. If the argument holds, it's valid, and I can respect that. He's known for the infamous asymmetry argument, where he draws the conclusion that coming into existence is always a harm.
Welcome to the chat, Massilia and Zenape. I also am not sure if I've said welcome to Anon, but we did interact before. Welcome Nancy, Abdish, Niroda, Albao. Is there anyone else? Always happy. Fleeting Twilight, welcome. I think that's everyone. Don't think I've missed anyone. Obviously, Vegan Equilibrium, HP, Yasin. Nice.
Always. And to help us understand Benatar's argument,
today we're going to be talking about something called anti-natalism.
I explained Benatar's arguments to my children, and I must admit this is...
That's a funny idea.
Sort of weird, but if you're one of my kids, you are no stranger to the classroom discussions.
So what we're going to learn about today...
Attitude?
Very good.
Good, I cannot even read that.
I've been doing this about as long as they can remember.
Here's the basic argument, okay? You have a situation A, and you have situation B. In situation A, you exist. In situation B, you do not exist.
Yes, well, I mean, technically it's never exist, but yeah.
One minor correction here. It's more correct to say that in situation B, you never exist.
Okay, there we go. Tim's on it.
I clarify this a bit more later. Okay, back to the video.
Okay, so a way to think about this is you can think of Mia as well.
For context, Mia is their younger sister.
So Mia exists in situation A and Mia does not exist in situation B. You're somewhat familiar with that.
Yeah.
Because Mia didn't exist a few years ago and she exists today. But you can also think of this as in Mia and Michael.
Who's Michael?
A child that we have not had. Or Michelle. Or Micah. Or Mary.
Just all the M's.
We could have more children and name them all those names, but we don't. They simply just do not exist. So when we think of a life that you're going to live, do you remember our discussion about happiness?
Yeah.
We talked about pleasure and pain. We kind of talked about how pleasure doesn't equal happiness.
Yeah.
But it's a part of it. But there.
You know, this is such a good video idea. Just a general video idea is like anti-natal. I'm assuming. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he'll give his opinion at the end of this, but like I'm assuming Tim is not an anti-natalist. But it'd be an interesting video to do, like anti-natalist explains anti-natalism to children.
There's suffering and there's pleasure, and they're kind of on opposite sides of the spectrum. So if you exist, you can experience pain, all right? And you can also experience pleasure.
Right.
Would you rather be in pain or would you rather not be in pain?
I would rather not be in pain personally,
So
but that's
pain,
just personal choice.
for most people, is considered a bad thing. And pleasure or happiness is good. Now, if you don't exist, the fact that there's no pain is good.
Yeah, but there's no pleasure
don't you
either.
have to experience pain to have happiness?
Pain is not the same thing as frustration
Overcoming
or a challenge or
something.
overcoming something difficult.
Yeah.
Pain is like kind of never good. Now, because we live in a world where there is pain and suffering, and to be happy, you need to get through it. And I think you will do better if you don't dwell on pain and think about it all day. But we would never say that pain is good. If you do not exist, there's no pain for that non-existent being. For Michelle, that we have not had, they will never experience pain, and you can say that that's a good thing. However, for the non-existent being, they cannot experience pleasure.
Or anything.
There's a few more people in the chat. Welcome to the chat. Aga. Not quite sure how to say your name, sorry. Nadia, welcome to the chat. Array. Welcome David, welcome Activism, welcome Just a Pair, welcome Ma, Nancy. Actually, I think I said hello Nancy as well. Cool, let's continue.
This is the tricky one. And this is what Benatar would say, it's not bad. It's not bad. For the non-existent being that does not exist, who isn't here, they can't be deprived of pleasure. They do not experience pain and suffering, which is good. However, they do not experience all the pleasures in life. They don't get to eat ice cream, they don't get to have happy days, they don't have birthdays, they don't have all those things.
That's depressing.
They don't exist, so they can't be depressed.
Yeah.
Not one fuck given. Like when I'm explaining the asymmetry to like people, it often feels easier to explain the asymmetry in terms of like the duties we have, right? Like, or the obligations we have in terms of like, we have a duty not to impose harm on someone else, significant and direct harm on someone else, unless there's caveats like we're preventing greater harm, or we have consulted them and stuff like this. But obviously those don't apply in procreation, and so that would count against creating someone, because you are imposing direct and significant harm on them. But so that counts against procreation, but we don't have this positive duty to like benefit people. Like it can be good if we benefit someone, and there's obviously this quibble of like, are we actually benefiting someone by creating them? I would say no. But we don't have a duty to benefit someone, especially someone who like doesn't exist, right? And so our duty to not impose suffering sort of outweighs that sort of like, it can be good to benefit someone, especially in that controversial case of benefiting them by creating them, which is, I think, very controversial to say. And that can be kind of similar. Or you can use the example of like, you have two couples, they're both considering having children, or they're, and they both go to the clinic and they get their genetics tested. One couple comes away finding out they're carriers of a recessive gene that will cause their child a lot of pain. One comes away with, finding out they're a recessive gene that would cause their child a lot of pleasure. Now, in the case of the couple that would have the child that would cause a lot of pain, that would be a bad thing for them to create that child, most people would say. Maybe the ultra-religious weirdos would not say that. But, most people would say, that's like, that is imposing harm on that child, and we shouldn't create the child in that case. That would count as a reason against creating the child. But the couple who have the recessive gene where the child would have like a lot of pleasure, this would obviously be good for the child if they were created. As in, once they're created, once they're in existence, it would be good that they have a lot of pleasure. But it wouldn't be a reason to create the child. Like that couple, in my view, shouldn't come away from the doctor's clinic saying, oh, well, we need to have a child now. If we know this is the case, it's like, no, there's no reason to create the child in these circumstances. It's just, if you do create them, they're going to have a better life on average, So maybe that's another simpler way to explain it.
Okay, so in another way of thinking of not bad is no worse.
That's actually really weird to think about.
Than being good. Over here, you have one bad thing and one good thing, and over here, you have one good thing and something that's not bad. And so he would say, not existing is preferable to existing.
But if you don't exist, you don't have like the opportunity to feel pleasure and like have like a life, that like I'm not like, man,
I'm really looking forward to stubbing my toe today. Like, I'm really excited for that. But it's like there's so many good things that like overcome that.
Yeah, hurting sometimes is like way better than like just not experiencing anything ever.
Yeah, like getting a scrape, like it's not like a reason not to live.
Benatar would say is that harms and pains far outweigh pleasures and happiness.
No.
So let me give you an example.
Definitely not true.
Have you ever seen somebody smiling and walking down the street and just super happy, and you ask them, why are you so happy? And they say, well, 3 or 5 years ago, I had this really pleasurable experience, and I'm just still happy from it. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
No, I've never heard of that. However, it is very common to see somebody walking down the street very sad. And if you were to ask them why they're sad, they could point at something 3, 5, 10 years ago that happened. They lost a child. They lost a husband. They had a terminal cancer diagnosis a year ago. They have severe chronic pain that they're dealing with. Let me ask you a question. I could grant you, I'm a magic genie, and I can grant you an hour of pure bliss. Some of the best pleasure. Think of like eating the best ice cream ever you've ever had in your life.
This would actually be like quite a fun family setup, you know, like having these, you know, family discussions with the whiteboard and pitching it to, you know, kids that are maybe more like imaginative than the average person. Maybe they're like not as indoctrinated into the culture that that they're in, just because they've been in the culture for less time.
In the most comfortable position, with the perfect climate, on the most comfortable couch you've ever been on. Just pure bliss for an hour. However, in exchange for that, I'm going to smash your toes for 5 minutes with a hammer. Just 5 minutes, though. Would you do that trade-off?
No.
No.
No, I would like to keep my toes, thank you.
Well, I mean, like, so you wouldn't have any permanent damage, but you have to experience the pain of me smashing your toes with a hammer for 5 minutes. You may think, oh, there's all these good things in life, right? There's a lot of amazing things in life. But you can't deprive a non-existent person of the good things. Okay, let's say you go to have a child and you look at an embryo and it has this terrible disease, and you have an embryo that doesn't. You have a...
Ah, there we go. I mean, maybe I used that example in when I spoke with him, but I don't know. I don't want to claim that I gave him the inspiration for this thought experiment.
Moral duty to pick this one over here, right?
Yeah.
People would think you're crazy if you pick the one that has the bad disease. So you have a moral duty to avoid harm. But no one says that there's a duty to make more children. No one would say, oh my gosh, you've deprived a non-existent being. So think of like the Michelle, the Michael, the future children that mommy and daddy could have. No one is looking at us and going, why are you not making more children so that they can experience pleasure? Symmetry is when things are the same on both sides. You have two eyes, like your body is pretty symmetrical. You have two eyes. Now, there's obviously people who don't, you know, but in general, we are symmetrical. So what he's saying is that there's an asymmetry. If you exist, you have one good thing and one bad thing. You have pleasure and you have pain. If you don't exist, you have no pain, and you're not missing out on anything because you don't exist. What do you think this means if you accept this philosophy?
No have kid.
If everyone just stop having kids, then eventually everyone will die, and then there'll just be nobody.
That's sad for us to think about that. But for someone who doesn't exist, how much does it affect them?
Nothing.
0. So are you sad for all of the Martians that don't exist on Mars?
No.
No. All the moon people who don't live on the moon, who don't exist, are we sad for them? No. So in the future, if there were no humans, it's like, I'm not going to be here. They don't even exist. There's nothing really to be sad about. There's no one to be deprived. When you create somebody, you've now created somebody who can now experience pain and all of those things. Yes, what he would argue, if you have a child, you are necessarily causing harm. You are creating harm every time you create a child. I created you into this world. I'm responsible for your life in a lot of ways. Now, I can't live your life. I can't make you do things, but I'm going to support you your entire life and hope that you, and of course Mia too, have...
Which I think like that's very responsible of him, you know, because like there are a lot of people out there who would not accept that responsibility of lifelong commitment to your offspring. You know, maybe some people will talk a good game, but... yeah, a lot of people have this mindset of like, no, once you get to a certain age, you have to sustain yourself, blah, 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 blah. which obviously, like I've said before, you know, if you can look after yourself, then it's probably much better to do that, to be independent of your parents, better for your relationship with your parents, but also just better for you. But the parents should be willing to fulfill that commitment to their children for their entire lives. You know, if you didn't want that commitment, then don't have the child. But yeah, that's very cool that, you know, Tim has put this across to his children of like, you know, I've taken on this lifelong commitment to, you know, trying to, you know, look after you the best I can and make sure you don't come to try and mitigate the harm that will come your way.
An amazing life. And yes, you're right, parenting has a big impact on how the child turns out. But you will experience suffering. There's no way around it. I cannot protect you from everything. I won't even be here. If things go perfectly, in the best way, when you die, I won't be there. If I'm there when you die, something went wrong. Then that means you lived a shorter life than I did.
Man.
So, well, I should die before you. So the bottom line is that I'm going to do everything I can to set you guys up for success. Mommy and Daddy will. But I will not be there when you're in some of your darkest times. Isn't that sad?
I'm getting emotional now.
After talking with my children, I didn't go into extreme detail about all the things that can go wrong, such as Halopo-Siemens syndrome. The disease causes a child's skin to slough off when exposed to air, and if you try to feed the child, their mouths will eventually collapse.
Oh, Jesus, that is fucking awful. I mean, that is the risk argument for anti-natalism in practice, you know? Like, the risk argument being that, you know, when we create new people, we are putting them at risk of being in the category of people whose lives are utterly miserable. And even if you think it could be a good thing to create people, playing that form of Russian roulette with someone else's life is unacceptable. And again, like the conversation I had with this guy on Sunday, he uses the example of, you know, say you're playing Russian roulette with someone, you point it at their gun, you point the gun at the head, click, and it doesn't shoot. And you say to them, see, look, it's fine. It didn't kill you. But the point is that you took the risk. You know, it wasn't your moral right to take that risk with the other person's welfare completely unnecessarily. That's the key issue there with the risk.
And they are always in intense pain. Half of the children die within the first year. In some cases, the child may live to the age of 12 before they inevitably contract skin cancer. But what do Benatar's critics have to say?
I think this is one of the most insane claims I have ever heard. He's not the first person to say it. So it just ignores what economists call opportunity cost. The good thing that you could have
I don't know who this guy is. I don't think I've not come across him.
had but don't is a loss.
This is...
Yeah, but there's no one in existence to, like, there's no one for that deprivation to be an issue for.
Dr. Brian Kaplan, professor...
Well, there's no deprivation. That's the point.
Professor of economics at George Mason University and a New York Times best-selling author.
So I just wanted to go back and see if I recognize any of those books. Don't Be a Feminist. I can't read what that one is. No, I don't think I know any of those.
And I sat down with him at UT Austin to talk about his most relevant work related to this topic. Selfish reasons to have more kids.
What does pronatalism mean to you?
Right, I do call myself a pronatalist, or usually to shorten it to natalist. It's cleaner. To me, it just means thinking that when you create new life, you are generally doing a good thing.
You know what is quite funny is that, like, in anti-natalist circles, obviously referring to someone as a natalist is not a slur in any way, but it's like it's an identification of what they believe, but it's perceived negatively because obviously we're opposed to what they believe. And it's so strange to hear someone like proudly call themselves a natalist, because I'm like, you wear that badge with pride? What?
For the world. Not in absolutely every case. Hitler's mom screwed up, but what are the odds that your kid's the next Hitler? Much more likely that your kid is going to be a roughly decent person who enjoys life and contributes to the world. So I call the book Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids because I do present a totally prudential argument from the point of view of the individual potential parent. I also, however, have a chapter about the social effects where I say, look, if you like the idea of having kids but you're refraining out of guilt, don't feel guilty, because on balance, you're making the world a better place.
In his book, Kaplan argues that
so you're using the person as a means to an end.
Having children can be less demanding and more enjoyable than many people believe. And he doesn't want to encourage all childless couples to start cranking out babies. It's just that many parents overestimate the impact of their efforts on their children's outcomes at the expense of their own satisfaction and enjoyment, which could include decisions that restrict their family planning. One of the many examples he uses in the book is club sports. While they could be great for some families, many parents could not afford or do not have enough time to put several children in club sports at the same time. And as it turns out, club sports don't impact your child's outcome all that much at all. Kaplan points to twin adoption research revealing that genetics significantly outweighs most parenting decisions. And he was also quick to dismantle Benatar's asymmetry.
If you could have won the lottery, you didn't, that's bad. It's it's not bad in the sense that you were worse off than if you had lost $1 million. It's bad
and we raised
them to be warriors against evil. We've got a donation from Soy Theist. What a lad. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well, man. With no message, but thank you so much for the support. Yes, appreciated. So this guy, yes, okay. So, me here, if I lose out on winning the lottery, that sucks. I don't know if I would consider that a harm for me to not win $1 million. Yeah, I don't know if I would consider that a harm, but yeah, obviously I'm now not going to be as well off as I could have been. But that's consequential for me as an individual who exists. But if we're considering someone who we're, thinking about creating, well, they're going to have no use for the if they never exist, they're not made worse off by not coming into existence to win the lottery, because if they never exist, they don't have a need for the money that they would gain. What does the money do? They can buy food, they can buy, amazing experiences with their family, they can buy a car, all this sort of stuff. If someone never exists, they simply don't exist to be in need of any of that stuff. That stuff is not of value to them. So, yeah, I'm not really sure what he's getting at.
You have failed to have won $1 million, and you would not talk any person of common sense out of this conclusion.
Kaplan's dispute with Benatar's asymmetry argument is that the absence of pleasure is not bad, but bad. And if that's the case, then we no longer have an asymmetry. If the negatives and positives cancel out, the equation is balanced.
Asymmetry is nonsense. Failure to get a good thing is actually, in principle, just as bad as the experiencing of a bad thing. And the prudent thing is to net, to sum. Full stop, iron line in the sand. No reasonable person would ever think otherwise, and only a weird dogma would get you off.
So I understand that, sometimes these things can just come down to base value and how you value certain things. But it would be interesting to hear his actual reason for thinking that, right? Because obviously for anti-natalists, they're thinking, well, if someone doesn't exist, then, there's let's say, I don't know, chocolate cake, for example. The existence of chocolate cake is good for me because I'm a person who exists and I can, benefit from that chocolate cake. It is serving my underlying desire to, I was going to say be nourished, but I'm not sure how much chocolate cake nourishes you. But it it attends to my underlying desire for pleasurable experiences, right? Which is actually what most people point to as good things, like reasons to create people. Fundamentally, they serve our desire for pleasurable experience, or meaning, purpose, stuff like that. So the only reason those things are valuable is because they attend to a desire we have, right? If you don't create the desire in the first place, i.e. don't create the person, then those things you're pointing to as valuable reasons to create someone actually have no value with reference to the person that you're thinking of creating, because they don't exist to have the desires that would make those things valuable. Let me give you another reason. Sorry, another like avenue to think at this from. Let's say medicine. Okay, here's another example, and Benatar even uses this. Medicine. If I don't have the capacity to get ill, medicine is of no use to me. And so saying, you know, I can put you in, this would be analogous to creating you. I can give you the capacity to be benefited by medicine, obviously it would come with the fucking, what's it called? The capacity to also like get ill and be impacted negatively. But it's like, I have no need for X thing, like medicine. And so instilling in someone the desire for that thing doesn't actually overall benefit them, because you're simply creating a new desire that needs to be satiated and then often inadequately satiating it. That to me doesn't seem like a benefit at all. This is like saying that you're going to, employ someone but get them hooked on heroin and pay them in heroin. How is this a benefit to the person? Even if you ignore like the massive negative consequences to the person, like that doesn't serve their actual pre-established interests, right? Like if someone's working, they are doing it for money because money is going to benefit their underlying interests. Not giving them money, but getting them hooked up on something they previously didn't need at all. So creating a new desire and then fulfilling that and not fulfilling or attending to any of their pre-existing desires. For me, that is not a valid form of compensation. Like, I don't see that as benefiting someone. I see that as like cooking the books, basically, and trying to claim you're benefiting someone. So creating someone just so they have the chance of winning the lottery seems ridiculous to me.
On some other track.
I reached out to Malcolm and Simone Collins, who run pronatalist.org, and they shared their opinions about the asymmetry argument.
I can see why the asymmetry hypothesis is so compelling to people. If you believe, like many pro-lifers do, that life is something that just like all of a sudden exists or doesn't exist, it can be a logical position. However, if you're the type of person who I think is like most people approach life, you think life is a spectrum of potentiality. If I do something today...
So this is something we got... I'm not going to super get into it here. But if you want to get into their whole idea of potentiality... John and I discussed this with them in our debate we have. Again, just type in on YouTube like natalist, anti-natalist debate, something like that, or go on my channel on the debate playlist and it will be one of those, and it's a picture of the four of us in the thumbnail. Yeah, I don't find it at all convincing, this idea of like basically, even non-existent beings are in shades of potentiality. Even if you want to frame it that way, I don't see why we should value the potentiality of non-existent beings. But yeah, I'm not going to get into it here. Like you can watch that debate.
That causes suffering to someone who's not yet born, that thing is still a moral negative action. And I think because that's intuitively, a lot of people don't see life as being binary. They see it as being the spectrum of potentiality. And by denying potential humans the right to make a choice about their own existence, I am causing harm to those potential humans, even if they don't come to exist through my actions.
Yeah, again, I'll leave you to watch the debate.
Malcolm and Simone aren't just armchair intellectuals. The couple is planning on having a lot of children.
We're going to have more than 7 if we can, basically, until my uterus is forcibly removed in a botched surgery. I'm going to keep going.
Malcolm and Simone believe that genetics play a huge role in the happiness and success of a future child. And so all of their children and future children are genetically screened and planned using IVF. And let's say they do everything right. They select the embryos with the best genetics and a family with good parental happiness and well-being, and they do the other things like provide basic care, safety, education, and socialization. And the goal of parenting is not some selfish mini-me experiment, but to give the child a good life. What's wrong now?
Even if it would be a net benefit to someone to exist, it's wrong to go and give someone a package that includes anything bad without their consent. So you can say, look, I can't go and pick a person off the street, grab them, put them in a cage without asking whether they want it, and then give them $1 million at the end and say, you're better off, so I didn't need your consent. You need their consent anyway. And there's the problem that you cannot get consent from someone before they exist. And so that is at least a much cleaner argument for why it's wrong to create a life, because you can't ask someone whether they...
Yeah, I would say like the consent argument is even stronger if you combine it with like the argument that generates the position that, you know, it's not a benefit to create someone. So the asymmetry basically. Because it's like, yeah, you know, like, okay, if someone were to grab me from, you know, on the street and lock me in a cage for 30 seconds and then let me out and say, it was just a prank and here's £1 million, am I going to be angry at that person? No, I'm probably going to be glad that that happened. But the thing is that I'm an existing person. I have an underlying desire built into me for pleasurable things. And things that sustain my health. The money is going to be like massively in service to that. The being locked in a cage is not going to undermine that in any real way, you know, unless, I mean, okay, because I'm looking at it from my perspective. In general, you know, like you could lock someone in a cage and they could have a panic attack and die. You know, you don't know the person you're doing it to. So I'm not making a general ethical point here. Like I do think it would be unethical to do that. I'm just saying if it happened to me, I wouldn't be that angry at that person. I fucking lost my train of thought now. Where was I going? Yeah, but yeah, I have this underlying desire that the money is going to attend to. It wasn't that significant a harm. And you could almost say that it's avoiding greater harm because the £1 million I'm getting, you know, that that could be used to stave off greater harms in the future. Obviously, reality is complicated. Like, you could give someone £1 million and they could get hooked on drugs and it could destroy their life. So,
in this world, and we raise
them to be warriors against evil. Thank you so much, Nadia. We've got a super chat from Nadia. I am going to get to it right now, but I just wanted to quickly finish this point. So, yeah, reality is complicated. Like, even something where you violate someone's consent because you think it's going to be a massive, overwhelming benefit to them, you don't know that for sure. So all of these things count against it being analogous in the example of bringing someone into existence. I don't think you are benefiting them because there's no underlying desire existent because there's no existing person for you to attend to. It's not staving off greater harm. In fact, it's imposing harm on them. And a third thing, which I've forgotten. Cool. Okay. All right. Nadia, thank you so much for the support. So Nadia says, congratulations for the documentary appearance. I mean, thank you for your congratulations, but let's not big it up. Apologies if I've bigged it up. I'm only in it for like 30 seconds. Hopefully there'll be many more to come. I hope so as well. On that point, I'm not going to reveal anything, but there is something else in the background which hopefully will be released soon, but we shall see. Hopefully there'll be more to come. And here's to keeping the Collins couple from misleading anyone else. Cheers. Thank you so much, Nadia. Absolute legend. And let's keep going.
Want to exist before they're born. There is a concept in philosophy called hypothetical consent.
So I did a again, like the whole, I mean, I've already said why I don't think consent carries over. It's not staving off greater harm. I don't think it's a benefit to come into existence, all this sort of stuff. But this whole idea of hypothetical consent, it's like, because, okay, let's see him explain it, and then I'll give my response afterwards, because I don't want to mischaracterize, I don't want to spend the next 5 minutes mischaracterizing him. So let's see him explain it first.
Normally, you don't need it because you can just ask people's consent. But there is a range of questions where hypothetical consent is highly illuminating, and to say that you just reject it is crazy. If you find someone who is passed out by the side of the road and they need CPR, normally they will not have a sign around their neck saying, "I consent to CPR." This is
okay, yeah. So based in that, we're making the assumption, which is probably a pretty reasonable assumption, that that person, you know, has a will to continue living. You know, that situation is very complicated. Like, this is a person who, you know, I don't know the specifics of the situation, but they're already someone who is in existence in some way. It's a complicated situation where there's someone who, at least at some point, has been in existence. You can debate what the best thing to do is, but that person has or does already exist. So it's a complicated ethical landscape. With someone who has never existed and you're considering creating, there is simply no one in existence to have any interests in coming into existence. And so you don't need to like have this complicated balance of, you know, what attends to their interests, what doesn't, all this sort of stuff. You know, like when someone's in existence, now you've got to be like, okay, well, you know, they have an interest in this, but they don't have an interest in this. Like they've got to balance these things in their considerations. But when it comes to creating someone, there's simply no one who exists to want to come into existence, right? So the bar to me for the harms that will be imposed on them and avoiding those is very low, because there's no countervailing interest to come into existence. So yeah, this example of like someone being knocked down at the road, it's like there is a person there who has pre-existing desires that we can very reasonably assume, and yeah, they exist. This is like looking across the table at someone and saying, you know, it's pretty reasonable for me to assume that you want to continue living. If someone's just been hit by a car, you know, it's a reasonable assumption to assume they want to continue living, and so you should provide medical assistance.
This is one where you say, well, I can't ask him because he's unconscious about whether he wants.
Yeah, exactly. So if you can't ask someone something, you just have to go on what you think is in their best interests, knowing that they have interests. But like, if you don't create someone, there was never anyone to exist to have interests.
Wants to be saved, but I believe he would say it. It is reasonable to think that he would say it. I don't have any other opportunity. If he were awake, I would ask him, but he's not awake. He's not going to be awake. It's a choice of either let him die or assume consent. And so
okay, there. So yeah, he's definitely talking about an example where someone isn't dead yet. So this is someone who exists, who has pre-existing interests.
I will do it. That's
so completely. Now you're talking about continuing to exist. A matter of continuing to exist, not starting coming into existence.
It's hypothetical consent. That's a valid use, and it also directly applies to whether it's okay to create a human life. It's impossible to go and get their consent before they're born, so that's where you got to say, well, Is it likely to think, is it reasonable to think that they would consent? Yes, because typical human life, though it always contains some suffering, on balance is a good deal.
Okay, so couple things to say on that. So I've made a video on this already. I recently did a video on Stockholm Syndrome. I've also got a video on like why most people being glad to be born is not a reason to create them. But very quickly, 1, appeal to popularity fallacy. 2, these people already exist. They're usually thinking of that question not of would you rather be not born, but would you rather end your existence? Because people aren't used to thinking about not being born. So usually people misunderstand the question. 3, the consent someone gives once they've been brought into existence is highly tainted. It's tainted by their innate biological, evolutionarily built-in desire to want to continue living, fear of death, fear of separation from the things we know. You know, once you become attached to people and things and places, it's very hard to think of an alternative reality where you're not, and it makes you feel sad, right? So all of these things massively corrupt our ability to give, they make the consent we give retrospectively highly suspect, right? And then a 5th thing, I think that was 4 I gave already. A 5th thing, or a 4th thing, whichever one I got to, is if we have this standard that you can do something to someone which is imposing significant harm, and it makes it okay if at the end of it they look back and give retrospective consent, then this would justify all sorts of horrible abuses. So starting up like radicalization camps, like, you know, people being indoctrinated into fucking death cults, you know, a government having a breeding program and raising them to be political radicals that serve the government's will. But there's a section that also indoctrinates them to make them like the fact that they do this sort of stuff. I mean, this justifies breeding Islamists that go out and bomb people, not from the position of like the harm they're causing, but it justifies the creation of the Islamists themselves, because they will often get to a point where they say, yeah, you know, I mean, we can radicalize people to the extent where they think it's good to blow themselves up. That's highly unethical. You don't think that people have the capacity to put someone in a shit situation, but indoctrinate them to think that they were like made better off by being born. This is ridiculous. This is a ridiculous standard. Like, to meet that standard, all you need to do is have the sleight of hand to indoctrinate people to basically have Stockholm Syndrome for you or the situation they're in. It's ridiculous.
In the EMS world, we call it implied consent. So here's a man unconscious on the street. And I've treated a lot of unconscious people like this when I was a firefighter and paramedic. This man overdosed on opiates. Could be heroin, hydrocodone, morphine, or even fentanyl. And let's say you had a reversal agent that you could administer, saving his life almost immediately.
Pretty sure they need to roll him on his side, right? Isn't that like health and safety 101? Welcome to the chat, the man. Welcome, confusing. Welcome, Augustine. Welcome, Kai. Welcome, 2-1. Welcome, Shatom. Welcome, MJ. Welcome, Daniel Tambi. Oh, welcome, Daniel. Daniel and I just recently did an episode of anti-natalism around the world for Nigeria. So definitely go check that episode out. It's one of my most recent videos. In fact, is it my most recent video? Or have I released one since then? No, it's my second most recent video. So definitely check that out after this stream.
What would you do?
All right, here we go. He's saying, why did you? Well, you were a little bit of sweet.
Don't touch me, bro.
No, because I touched you too. I gave you a sternum rub and you wouldn't wake up.
Maybe he's being irrational and doesn't understand the condition he was in. Or perhaps he's suicidal and doesn't value his life at all.
Let me die, yo. Let me die. We'll put the light for you, you understand?
it just goes to show you that even in circumstances like this, you can be wrong, even when you are well-meaning.
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing. Like I said, like life is complicated, you know? Like you could be doing something you think is really good, but actually you fuck things up. Like maybe the case here. I don't know the details of this case. We just have a small video, but like it's complicated, you know? Whereas if you don't create someone, you're simply not bringing someone into a situation which could be incredibly complicated or will be incredibly complicated. No one's life is simple. So yeah, I don't find this idea of, you know, implied consent at all convincing.
Going to hell! You going to hell!
And I'd argue if you want to be left alone, maybe don't overdose on a busy street corner. But in any case, is this man an ungrateful human? Like an anti-natalist who has been given the gift of life only to complain after the fact. Malcolm had a slightly different take on the consent issue.
For us, morally, the only person who can decide if a life is worth living is the person living that life. And so when somebody says you're bringing children into this world without their consent, that is true, but we are also not morally against suicide. Like,
I don't necessarily think a life is you know, worth living, and I would say worth continuing only from the judgment of the person who is living it, right? So I can imagine a situation where, I mean, look, I've had a close person in my life be in this situation where, you know, they are near the end of their life anyway, they are incapacitated, and so they're not conscious enough to be able to make any decisions for themselves. You know, this is just, they're just not in that state. Their body and their mind has deteriorated in such a way where they can't make these decisions, but they're very clearly in pain. Now, if a country has, you know, assisted dying or, you know, the right to die, I would say it's very reasonable for other people to make a judgment on behalf of that person, because that person can't make a judgment for themselves. In many places, what they'll do is they will just try and mitigate the pain. So have that person continue living, but try and mitigate the pain. That's by no means perfect. In the case that or one of the cases that I saw of the person I, was close to, that was the approach that was taken, and it was very clearly not a perfect approach, you know. Maybe in some cases you can fully mitigate the pain that someone has while they're dying, but you can't in every case, and I'm sure in many cases you can't. And that was the experience that I saw. So yeah, I don't buy this whole thing of like the only person who we should listen to about whether a life is worth continuing is the person who's living it, because sometimes they're not in a position to make good judgments, and other people are actually better and more responsible in making judgments for that person's life. And we see this in many other aspects, you know, like if you move outside of the question of like ending life, but just making decisions for other people. I mean, this happens to every child, every person with like severe learning difficulties, many elderly people as well. You know, we try to act in their best interests in a good faith way. Obviously, that can be open to abuse. Anytime someone is making a decision for someone else and has authority over them, obviously that's open to abuse. And we should put whatever safeguards need to be put in place. But the idea that the person whose life it is always the best judge of what is, you know, best for their life, including whether it should end, is, in my eyes, not true. That is not to say that we should just always hand off responsibility and authority to others. There's a lot of times when authority has been misused, especially, and also it's often advantageous to decentralize decision making. You know, I take it on a case by case basis, but I'm not a massive fan or advocate for centralized, you know, government. Who's to say the government knows how to make decisions for us better than we do, you know? I'm not against government or anything like that, but this is just another example of one set of people or one person making a decision on behalf of another person or another set of people. It's not always appropriate. It's not always inappropriate. So yeah.
You're even pro like assisted suicide due to what happened to Simone's mom. This is an issue that's actually very important to us. People can.
Yeah. So I think he just said they're pro assisted suicides. Yeah, I'm in agreement with them.
Children in this world, and we
raise them to be warriors against evil. Thank you so much, Matthew. Matthew Brennan. That is, I'm assuming Japanese. I don't know if is it yen or yuan. I think it's yen, isn't it? I think it's China that has yuan. Thank you so much for the support. Appreciate it. And keep being a top legend.
Choose to end their lives functionally whenever they want. And I think what anti-natalists don't like is the burden of the consequences of that choice are on their shoulders. And
I don't think necessarily, like, at the moment, I'm at peace with the fact that I exist. At some point, I'm going to die, and hopefully I will have reasonable control over when I die and the manner I die. I might not always be at peace with that. People go up and down. But I don't think that is necessarily like a rub for anti-natalists. I think what anti-natalists are saying is there's no advantage to being brought into existence, and so why would we create people into a situation where there's no benefit to them, and they're put in a situation where they could be severely harmed, and then the only way to get out of it is killing yourself, which is horrible for you and other people, and in practice is often very difficult. It just makes no sense to me. And to appeal to this vague notion of potentiality when the consequences are extremely real and can be very brutal for people, I personally didn't buy it. But
say, I don't want to deal with having to make that choice. And to me, what I'm hearing is I would deny someone else the right to live, someone else who would have enjoyed existing, who would have not wanted to take this choice, just so I don't personally have to deal with the responsibility of this choice. That to me seems like a completely morally monstrous position.
And so while this man may not wish to be resuscitated, only a monster would walk away from him with the antidote in hand.
2,500 years ago, Epicurus said, look, if you really actually think life is not worth living, we're in Greece, there's a cliff. The fact that you don't do it shows even you don't believe your own.
That's such a childish approach to this question. I've got a video on my channel called Why Anti-Natalists Don't Kill Themselves. Obviously, some anti-natalists do, like non-anti-natalists. The point is being anti-natalist doesn't commit you to saying that your life is shit or shit enough to want to end it. And it doesn't commit you to saying I should end my life right now. That is just a childish approach to the situation. There's a whole range of reasons why, but I'll leave you to go watch that video if you want to explore those reasons. But the idea that this guy has written a book, you know, on natalism, and his reply to anti-natalists is, you know, why not go jump off a cliff? I mean, fuck me.
Own argument, and if you don't believe your own argument, I'm not going to bother arguing with you. I think that it's totally commendable when you correctly perceive that you are going to have an immense negative amount of pleasure for the rest of your life to kill yourself. And I think if people care about you, they will understand that.
To
be warriors against evil. Thank you so much to... Oh, it is an anonymous donation, so I will not say thank you to a specific person. Well, I will, but I won't say their name. Thank you so much to the person who donated, and they simply said thank you. Thank you for the support. It's much appreciated. And sorry, I'm getting caught up here. Yeah, and I really appreciate people helping me cover costs to everything. Absolute legends. Let's continue listening to this guy in the red shirt who clearly has not considered the other side of the argument that in depth.
I just think that you should wait until that really happens. There's the movie Little Miss Sunshine, where this old guy who's like 80 and using heroin goes and talks to his grandkids, and he says, look, don't use drugs. At your age, it's crazy to use drugs. At my age, it's crazy not to.
And don't you start taking that shit. When you're young, you're crazy to do that stuff.
What about you?
What about me? I'm old. When you get old, you're crazy not to do it.
Any young person, if you feel depressed or sad and you're listening to this, don't kill yourself. Definitely do not. You know, there are so many ways to turn your life around. You haven't even scratched the surface. On the other hand, if you're 90 and you are in constant agony and your prognosis is just to get worse and worse, then totally kill yourself. And that is absolutely my personal plan, is when things look really bad to do it, and I'll be happy to do it. And so I think that's totally reasonable. I'm not someone who says cling to life through misery.
Okay, let's take a moment to address the elephant in the room. If anti-natalists argued that it's better to have never been, then why don't they go skydiving without a parachute? And I don't mean to make light of this topic. It's a serious question that many great thinkers, such as Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Hume, and Camus, have all given considerable thought. If it's better to have never been, then why continue to live? And after spending time with anti-natalists, here's what I have learned. First, anti-natalism is narrowly focused on procreation, that creating a new life is a harm. However, the philosophy doesn't tell you what to do with a life that's already here, but it does raise the question, because the core value that underpins anti-natalism is the avoidance of suffering. And this is why nearly every anti-natalist that I've met just so happens to be vegan. While I was in Fort Worth, there was somewhat of a crossover in activism.
See how miserable they are and they're tired? He's like hitting them so they like lift their head up to look at the camera and stuff.
There was this longhorn across the street that was used as a ride, and it really distracted and frustrated Deets and Noodles. And there were these horses that had spikes in their hooves to make them prance around.
Oh, what cunt. Oh my god, that is fucking sadistic.
They just banned it in Tennessee. It's all pain-induced.
So with that being said, if you believe life is suffering, why continue to live? In the movie Shawshank Redemption, Brooks was incarcerated for 50 years, during which time he became so accustomed to prison life that it became preferable to him. Upon being paroled, Brooks releases his pet bird, Jake. The outside world.
I think I actually used this example in my video on why anti-natalists don't kill themselves, but I might be wrong. Maybe that's where Tim got it, or maybe got it from somewhere else. Maybe I got it from somewhere else and Tim got it from that place as well. I can't remember.
The world is overwhelming. He struggles to adjust and finds himself failing at his job and feeling isolated.
Make sure you double bag, like the lady says, understand?
Yes, sir. Surely will.
He misses Jake, his beloved pet, and goes to the park hoping the bird will return. Brooks contemplates robbing the store where he works just to be sent back to prison. Ultimately, he chooses a different path, ending his letter with somber words.
I doubt they'll kick up any fuss. Not for an old crook like me.
Brooks isn't an anti-natalist, but objectively, prison life is miserable when compared to freedom. But prisoners trudge on living due to the combination of fear, familiarity, and the small comforts or meanings that can be found within their current circumstances. Anti-natalists never asked to be created, and if they could have not existed in the first place, they would have preferred that. Most of them discovered the philosophy in adulthood. They had a direction in life. They have family, they've made friends, and they have goals. And while, like Brooks, there certainly is a point in which they would bow out, their biology and culture has conditioned them to march forward in life. We'd never say a 50-year prison sentence following a double homicide is a life worth creating, but when you're in the midst of it, the next day presents itself.
I think he's actually explained it pretty well there, and I like how he's interwoven the considerations of an actual anti-natalist with the story of Brooks.
But that doesn't mean they wouldn't press the red button.
Now we get into the spicy territory of things outside the realm of anti-natalism.
If you could end suffering,
but often get confused with it.
Tomorrow, yeah, probably anything is justifiable, probably by any means necessary. Like if I found out tomorrow that sentient extinction could possibly happen, was skinning all the living things alive slowly, I'd hate it. I would say that it's what we have to do.
This is Amanda, host of the Exploring Anti-Natalism podcast, and she's been featured on channels such as the Soft White Underbelly. And she does not shy away from the infamous red button thought experiment. And it goes like this. Let's say you have a big red button, and if you were to press it, all life would instantly vanish. No more humanity. Many anti-natalists think you have a moral obligation to press the button. While it does involve ending people's lives, thus killing them, it would prevent all procreation. And in Amanda's point of view, it would end so much future harm that even if everyone had to be skinned alive, it would be well worth it.
The only thing that really matters is the suffering coming to a finality.
But not all anti-natalists agree.
It simply isn't anything. Wait, who's that? To do with anti-natalism. And I think there were two main reasons why it doesn't have anything to do with anti-natalism.
This is Lawrence Anton, and when I started this research journey, he was the first anti-natalist I spoke with.
Whatever formulation of the red button that is used, the ultimate question that is being asked is, if you could end all lives in an instant, would you? But one of the fundamentals of anti-natalism is understanding that it pertains to starting lives, not continuing them or not ending them. Now, of course, someone could say, but the red button puts an end to all procreation, and isn't that what anti-natalists want? Yes, anti-natalists want an end to reproduction, but not by any means. This is like saying committing a genocide will lower the carbon footprint of humanity, and environmentalists want humanity to have a lower carbon footprint. Yes, environmentalists want humanity to have a lower carbon footprint. But again, not by any means. It is not at all useful. It gives you no further information about the ethics of the act that you were originally talking about. It simply tells you about the length that that individual person is willing to go to have their ethical ideals realized.
And after
So there you have my thoughts straight from the horse's mouth. So I won't go on about the red button here, but I've done a video on why anti-natalists should stop talking about the red button. I then had a discussion about it with Tejas. And then I also did a video that's kind of related on the relationship between anti-natalism and extinctionism. So if someone's interested in the red button, my thoughts on it, and related matters, then check out those 3 videos on my channel. One about the red button, then a discussion that's posted pretty much straight away after with Tejas, the cosmic anti-natalist, and then my video on the relationship between anti-natalism and extinctionism.
Speaking with Lawrence and Amanda, I learned that there are many different opinions about anti-natalism, and it's beyond the scope of this video to cover them all in detail.
Anti-natalism goes against the grain of people's most sacred notions of what life is and what they're supposed to be doing here. And in order for anti-natalism to thrive...
And of course, I'm sure everyone knows Amanda. Amanda, like Tim said, hosts the Exploring Anti-Natalism podcast. Definitely go check it out, Exploring Anti-Natalism podcast. I'm pretty sure it's the longest running anti-natalist podcast. There's a couple of anti-natalist podcasts out there, but this is pretty sure is the longest running one. And there's some great episodes on there, so definitely go check it out.
It probably does require tremendous societal shifts. I mean, we live in a pro-life, pro-natalist world. I mean, and the anti-natalists are the ones writing this bad product review. But I do actually sort of, on one level, agree with Brian Kaplan that some of the arguments for anti-natalism, I mean, they convince me. I accept asymmetry and the consent argument and everything, but I'm a hardcore anti-natalist. They don't necessarily work on a regular population. And so there's tools in the anti-natalist.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't think anti-natalists should get too beat up when someone else doesn't accept an argument that they accept. Obviously, keep an open mind. And if someone repeats the argument back to you that you're presenting in such a way and with such counter arguments that they convince you to drop the argument, then drop it. But don't beat yourself up too much if someone isn't convinced by the same stuff as you. You know, sometimes they're just not getting it. And there's other things you can go on to rather than beat yourself up about it. Go on to the next person. Maybe you'll convince them. Or maybe do something else. You don't have to go around trying to convince people of anti-natalism. You can have a positive impact in the world in a whole variety of other ways that are in accordance with anti-natalism, right? Like, it's not like the only way to do good things in the world is try and convince someone not to have a child, right? You can influence others to not have children in other ways, like donating to a charity that helps to alleviate some issue which is correlated with lower birth rates, something like that, you know? So it's like, yeah, it's good not to fixate on this whole thing of like, oh, I must convince this person of anti-natalism. And it's like, look, it's good if you do, but at the end of the day, don't bust a nut over it. You know, it's not, you can just move on and do something else to have a positive influence in the world. Although that isn't to say just give up at the first hurdle. If you think something is genuinely worth pursuing and you've got a particular person who you think is, you know, it's going to be of immense value to convince them of anti-natalism, then keep going at it and try and do that and try innovative and new ways to convince them or influence their behavior. But yeah, just don't always get too emotionally attached to trying to change someone's mind.
Toolbox that we don't have.
For a young couple planning on having children, accepting antinatalism requires so much sacrifice that it's a complete non-starter.
Welcome a few new people to the chat. Welcome, don't watch my vid. And thank you so much for your compliment. Welcome, Iyenzi, Returnal, Real, Evil Roy. I hope you're not too evil. Snake Killer Thura, Abdallah. Welcome all the new people to the chat. I think that's everyone new. I don't think I've missed anyone.
The vast majority of childless young adults don't think that procreation is a moral harm. They just don't want kids or the responsibility and resources they require. The girl with a list on TikTok comes to mind. She famously cataloged hundreds of reasons to not have a child. A woman is more likely to postpone pregnancy after hearing about the 10-centimeter dilation is mostly for the head. It stretches out more for the shoulders. And unsurprisingly, virtually every con of having a child that was on this list was focused on the perspective of the mother. The swollen ankles, the lack of freedom, the expenses of having a child, and also many of the less talked about side effects of pregnancy.
This is part 2 of why your booty goes flat after you've given birth. So if you haven't watched part...
Most people don't think about the child at all. They're just weighing the pros and cons of how their life would be if they had a child. And just like there are different types of childless couples, anti-natalists come in many different flavors. Some are calm and collected, like Lawrence, and some anti-natalists...
That's a nice compliment. Welcome to the chat, Manira.
Are outcasts, depressed, and are just unlikable just about every way.
They're trying
to... that's great editing. That's funny and very true.
Shove down other people's throats. Fuck you.
We're just goddamn lizards walking on 2 legs with a big giant fucking ego.
Because I'm anti-life, and it's just a fact, and I'm not afraid to say it. I'm anti-life. Life is stupid, okay? It's a parasitic, malicious little organism that attempts, the DNA molecule attempts to take over all the matter, consume all the matter, so it all becomes me. I mean, it's a psychotically stupid thing.
And this anti-natalist likes to confront people about procreation in public.
All I'm doing here is requesting...
Danny does some really good stuff, very funny stuff, very engaging stuff. I think it was the last live stream I did. Let me just check. So yeah, the last live stream I did before this one that we're doing now was about Danny. There was a video put out about him, and yeah, Danny does some good stuff, some funny stuff, and it's good to see him in person as well, doing his stuff. Yes.
that we don't bring any more humans into existence. Let's just...
So, yeah, for anyone that doesn't know, basically Danny, so he is a Londoner, and he goes around and does what he calls, like, I don't know, like street performances or engagement art. He basically tries to get people to think and question deeply held assumptions. Often he talks about reproduction, but he does talk about other things.
It's just a request. I can't force you. Yeah, I can't force you, but I can tell you that about 3 weeks ago, I took some amazing magic mushrooms.
And his name is Danny Shine, and he is seemingly immune from social feedback. The man has absolutely no shame. And I was curious.
That's funny.
What is it like being an anti-natalist and a father?
I don't think my children really understand my position on this, because my theory is, and they object to this when I say this, we don't have long conversations about it because they're kind of fed up of it all, right? But I will know when they understand what I'm saying, when they come up to me and they put their arms around me and they say, Dad, I can't believe how lucky I am that you're my dad and you've shared with me this and you've saved me from making such a mess of my life, of the child's life, of my partner's life, and you've saved me, from doing this and from putting a human being in harm's way and costing me a huge amount of money and God knows what else, right? Until they do that, that to me is a sign that they don't really understand what I'm saying.
Gentlemen, please stop protesting illegally and go to your parents' house and protest there, because they are the cause of all your problems.
And the same applies to even some of the people who call themselves anti-natalists or somewhere in the middle. I don't think they really understand that it's so huge and it's so simple as well. It's so simple, but like so many things in life, it's very, very difficult to get it on board. And when you say a parent, yes, in some ways a parent it's easier because they've already done it. And obviously people always claim, oh yeah, here you are, you've had 3 kids, it's all right for you. Yeah, right. But on the other hand, for a parent, you could argue that it's much, much harder because you're admitting that you really didn't think about it properly and that what you did was really not a good idea, and that both of us had these 3 children when we hadn't even lived up a third of our lives. Now that I'm older, I'm starting to see what old age is like. When I've given that to them, they might get dementia. I mean, I saw my mum die of terrible cancer. Why didn't I not think about, after I had my 3rd child was after she died? Why didn't I put 2 and 2 together and say, yeah, my son might end up going through that. I don't want that to happen. But it just didn't enter my head.
Let's keep creating kids for the sake of the fucking economy. Are you joking? Mummy, Daddy, what?
Some people actually say that, have kids for the sake of the economy. Jesus Christ.
Why did you have me? I'm finding this whole life a little bit challenging. I wanted it for the sake of the economy, my son. Now get to fucking work, you slave. So you want people on Earth, right?
Although it's a difficult sort of idea to hold in some ways, I'm very grateful that it was pointed out to me by a friend of mine. I'm very, very acutely aware of how limited my ability to seek out truth, right? The only thing I think that we can do is we can find out what isn't true. We can research and notice things that aren't true. And I'm very biased. I'm subject to all sorts of biases. But I feel like,
I recognize that video. I think that's a video I did with Danny. So it's on my channel, but he must have uploaded it as well. So that is me, Danny, and John went to an Extinction Rebellion protest and asked them what's so bad about Extinction. And these were 2 of the girls that we spoke to.
I'm no longer kind of fighting anymore. I'm no longer, I no longer need to fight the system to keep this whole thing going. I just see through it all, and it's just, it's crazy. The whole thing is crazy.
You could end up making the same mistake your parents made, and it's not worth it.
It just seems obvious to me that There's no good reason, there's no need to bring in more beings that can and will suffer and die. What for?
The ultimate biohack is to overcome that stupid weapon of mass destruction between your legs and realize that it's going to get you into serious trouble, sure that you never, ever create any children.
While anti-natalists view procreation as a moral harm, the pro-natalists I spoke with don't spend much time convincing others to have children. In fact, they probably wouldn't even identify as a pro-natalist if other people's choices didn't affect them. But in case you haven't heard, we are facing what many sociologists and demographers describe as population collapse. This is a population pyramid. It shows how many people exist within different age ranges. This pyramid shows a country with lots of children when compared to those in late adulthood. But this graph doesn't look anything like most of the world, because this is a population pyramid for Uganda, where the average woman is having 4.5 children compared to 1.8 in the United States. This is the population pyramid for the United States, but to me it looks more like a population parfait. This large chunk right here, these are the baby boomers, the largest generation of humans the world has ever seen. Their children are down here. These are mostly millennials, like me, and some Gen Xers. And you might think that baby boomers aren't that large of a generation, but you must realize that as their average age increases, some of them won't be with us anymore. And if the pyramid starts to invert, which is what is happening, the population shrinks. And if it weren't for a steady rise in immigration, our pyramid in the USA would look a lot like Japan's, where adult diapers now outsell baby diapers. You can see that this trend of having less children started here. The boomers were born into large families, but didn't continue the trend. And here's the thing, the overall population will continue to grow for some time. But this isn't because people are having more kids, it's because overall mortality is decreasing. People are just living longer than they used to. So while the silent and greatest generation are dropping like flies, this giant boomer generation will hang around a bit longer than their predecessors. So we'll set some record-breaking global population numbers for a little while longer, but the ship has already sailed. The population will eventually collapse. And when it does, it will shrink as rapidly as it grew. People aren't having fewer babies because of war, poverty, or plague. They're just choosing not to. And in South Korea, for every 100 people, there will be 4.3 great-grandchildren. That's a 96% extinction rate within the next century. And despite China's abolishment of its restrictive child policies, the fertility rate continues to decline. Today, most people alive are living during a time with the most humans the world will ever have. The only countries with high fertility rates are almost exclusively in regions like Africa, and while immigration from these regions could be a band-aid for the industrialized world for a little longer, it's just a matter of time before they start to industrialize as well. Because when a country industrializes and starts to educate their female population, the fertility rate crashes and does not recover. In 100 years, I won't be here, right? And if I'm an anti-natalist, I don't have any children to survive the disaster I'm leaving before them. Why is this my cross to bear?
You really shouldn't care if you're an anti-natalist, and you are free and very welcome to let the line end with you. This movement is not about increasing human population indefinitely. It's not even about keeping it increasing. We're trying to warn people about the ramifications of a decreasing population, because right now our economy, government stability, city infrastructure are all predicated on growing populations.
And when a lot of people hear about the pro-natalist movement, the first thing they assume is that we are trying to stop demographic collapse. We are trying to stop this precipitous fall in fertility rates. That is absolutely not the case. There is no way anyone can do that at this point. If we are on the Titanic, we are hitting the iceberg no matter what now. We are just trying to get as many lifeboats ready as possible, and as many people and as a diverse group of people on those lifeboats as possible.
You, if you're watching this and an anti-natalist, do not need to be a part of this. We don't want this movement to be about coercing anyone to have children, shaming anyone about not having children. This is about freedom. And the biggest reason why we're in this, again, is we want to protect people's freedom to choose, freedom over reproductive rights, and freedom to...
Yeah, and to be fair, like this is the like approach that came across to me when I was talking to Simone and Malcolm. Like, I don't think they specifically are in it to try and, you know, like coerce or try and actively convince someone who doesn't want kids to have kids. There will be other pronatalists who are like that. You know, there are like many pronatalist governments that are trying to incentivize people to have children, and in some cases coerce people to have children. I don't know if people saw my video on Russia recently. But yeah, that's not something we should smear Simone and Malcolm with unless there's something I haven't been made aware of where they actually do advocate for that, but I haven't seen it. So yeah, just like the anti-natalist movement, community, group, people are diverse, I presume so the pronatalists.
To live in the culture that they value.
I consider myself a logical person, but don't we all? And on one hand, I love my children and I want them to live their best lives. And if that includes starting a family, I wouldn't want to talk them out of it. But on the other hand, I don't want to be wrong. So I reached out to the most popular anti-natalist, David Benatar, author of Better Never to Have Been, and I wanted to hear his response to the arguments I received.
Oh, that's cool that he got Benatar on for this. I didn't realize that.
Received from pronatalists. Why do people have such a hard time accepting anti-natalist conclusions or anti-natalism as a whole? Why is there such a barrier, do you think?
Biology. I think there are eons of evolutionary history of which we are the product.
I think it's biology, but I think it's also culture as well. You know, people want to be normal and stuff, which I guess, and like just fit in, which I guess you could also say is biology as well. I guess, you know, like it's part of our biology to want to fit in. We're like a social animal and stuff. So I guess it is, yeah, culture can often come down to biology as well. Or psychology can come down to biology.
And that is going to militate in most cases, not of course with all people, we're going to have exceptions, but in general, in the human species, that's going to militate against acceptance of anti-natalist ideas.
How bad is procreation when you compare it to, you know, heinous moral crimes like murder or something that's, you know, almost not even an unethical thing like a white lie or something?
The problem with that question, I think, is that it could be understood in different ways. If we are thinking about a murder, for example, it's not simply the wrongfulness of the killing that people think about. They also think about the blameworthiness of the murderer, because all of us should know that murdering people is wrong. Now, when it comes to something like procreation...
Oh, and actually, talking of Benatar, his new book is actually out today, at least in the UK. So Benatar has a new book that is coming out / has come out, depending on where you are, called Very Practical Ethics. And it basically, he's writing about, you know, things that we engage in every day and the ethics of those things. So yeah, it's obviously going to be relevant to what he's talking about now, about the difference between, you know, blame and the sort of like ethicality of an act.
Where the anti-natalist idea is really a very minority idea. Most people are never even exposed to that idea. We probably are not going to attach high levels of blame to people who procreate. And so if I make a claim about the wrongfulness of the action, somebody might construe that as a claim about the blameworthiness.
Yeah, I think that's true, right? Like we have a great moral repulsion and blameworthiness towards murderers. And we don't towards people who procreate, and yet the immorality of the act could be, depending on the arguments you make, could be similar, the same, or one could, you know, maybe procreation in some circumstances could be worse, but people misconstrue that with how appropriate it is to blame someone and be morally repulsed by them, or how morally repulsed they are. So yeah, I can kind of get what Benatar's talking about here.
The action. How wrong it is, for me, would depend on how bad the child's life is. And sometimes you can tell in advance that the child's going to have a very bad life. Sometimes you might have good reason for thinking that it would have a less bad life than the norm. But it's in the nature of these things that one can never be sure about what's going to happen. In fact, there are very high levels of uncertainty about what would happen to any child that one produced. And so you really are playing a kind of roulette.
Yeah, and one thing that I was speaking to someone about recently, I can't remember who it was actually, but they were talking about, this whole idea that people say about, we need to have kids to spread our values and stuff. And this person was talking about that, and they were saying about how they, they're not really convinced by that, because even though they may share your genetics, the people who are most genetically similar to you are your siblings. And think about how, because if you have a child, they only have half of your genetics, right? The other half is from your partner, whereas your siblings, you share the same two halves of, you share a half of your genetics from your both your parents as with your siblings. Obviously, you don't have the exact same genes, because that's not how how genes being passed on works. You don't get identical genes to your siblings unless they're an identical twin. But the people who will be most genetically similar to you, they were saying, and I believe this is right, are your siblings. And think about how different you are to your siblings. I mean, in my case, obviously it's anecdotal, but I'm quite different in many significant ways to my siblings. So, it's like, if you're so different from your sibling, why do you necessarily think that your offspring is necessarily going to be closer to you in how they behave, their views, than you are to your sibling, if you get what I mean? I actually can't remember what Benatar was saying that led me to say this. So let's just go back.
Wrongfulness of the action, somebody might construe that as a claim of the action. How wrong it is, for me, would depend on how bad the child's life is. And sometimes you can tell in advance that the child's going to have a very bad life. Sometimes you might have good reason for thinking that it would have a less bad life than the norm. But it's in the nature of these things that one can never be sure about what's going to happen. In fact, there are very high levels of uncertainty about what would happen to any child that one produced.
Oh yeah, that's all I was saying, was just it's interesting that even the people most genetically similar to us, and genetics, strongly influences our life. So those the closest to us genetically as our siblings can turn out so differently and lead such different lives. It just goes to show how uncertain the outcomes or the life that the child you create may have, because such a significant factor as genetics, and those who are most genetically similar, can be so different. It really just goes to show how much their life outcome is up in the air.
And so you really are playing a kind of roulette when you procreate. But the objective wrongness of it, I think, would depend on how severe that harm is. That would be different from the blameworthiness.
A lot of people might have trouble with the idea that the parent of the genetic anomaly kid, is he morally worse than the parent who procreated and kind of got lucky? I think a lot of people in the audience, will struggle to make that connection.
Oh, yes. Well, this is the phenomenon of what's known as moral luck. And it doesn't appear only in this context. So let's imagine that you're driving and you take your eyes off the road for a moment and you hit a child. And the child dies. Well, you've done a terrible thing. You've killed a child. Whereas somebody else might take their eyes off the road for a moment and they're lucky. Nobody steps into the road and they don't hit anybody. So they've both done exactly the same thing. One had a terrible consequence, another didn't. And in fact, this phenomenon of moral luck really pervades our life. Another instance of it would be procreation.
I presented the arguments against antinatalism from my interview with Brian Kaplan in the Collinses.
Asymmetry is nonsense. Failure to get a good thing is actually, in principle,
Oh, so let's see. I'm assuming he's presenting these to Benatar. So let's see how what Benatar's responses are like and if they're similar to mine.
Just as bad as the experiencing of a bad thing, and the prudent thing is to net, to some. Full stop, iron line in the sand. No reasonable person would ever think otherwise, and only a weird dogma would get you off on some other track.
The absence of benefit is not bad if there is nobody to be deprived of the benefit. And I'm quite explicit that if there is somebody who is deprived of the benefit, then it is bad. So if you fail to win the lottery, or you fail to get some pleasure that you could have got, that is bad because you're there and you're deprived of the benefit that you would otherwise have had. But if the reason why there's no pleasure is because there's no being to have the pleasure, that's what I'm saying is not bad.
And I think a lot of people misinterpret your argument. They make the leap that life is good, and therefore, if you miss out on life, you're missing out on something good.
Yeah, so I guess a way of summarizing it is that if there is a being with no pleasure, that's bad. But if there is no pleasure because there's no being, that's not bad. I guess it's like a summary.
You know, the trouble with this in my mind is you're talking.
Wait, sorry, I kind of spoke over him, so I didn't hear.
You would otherwise have had. But if the reason why there's no pleasure is because there's no being to have the pleasure, that's what I'm saying is not bad.
And I think a lot of people misinterpret your argument. They make the leap that life is good, and therefore, if you miss out on life, you're missing out on something good. You know, the trouble with this in my mind is you're talking about someone who doesn't exist. So you're having to make this case that something that doesn't exist is missing out, which is the conundrum.
There's a separate argument about how good or bad life is. And I think what you were doing in your representation was starting off with the assumption that life is good, and then saying that people are going to be deprived of that good. But there are two questions, really. The one is, how good or bad is life? And the other...
It's not that good. I've got a video coming up soon. It's just in the review process now. But yeah, I've got a video coming up soon about, you know, why our lives are not as good as many people think they are. Hopefully it'll be a good video. It just needs, you know, reviewing maybe one more time. And then hopefully I'll be... oh, don't know what that was. Hopefully I'll be able to record it very soon.
The question is the question about the axiological asymmetry.
I informed Benatar about the conversation I was going to have with my children. I told them how I was going to introduce the concept that even the greatest pleasures or goods in life do not outweigh the worst sufferings or harms. The lion's pleasure in feasting on the zebra pales into comparison to the zebra's intense suffering as it's being eaten alive.
So let me just clarify. So I'm not making the claim that some good could never outweigh pain, because we do make these judgments in our life. We do. For example, we take the shot in order to prevent something much worse from happening later. And I'm not denying the rationality of that. All I'm saying is that if we look at the nature of things like pleasure and pain, or the satisfaction of desires and the dissatisfaction of desires, there is an empirical asymmetry between them. It's not that we can never do comparisons and never do trade-offs that involve some pain. It's just that on balance, we've got very good reason for thinking that there's going to be more negative than positive.
And I also asked Benatar what he thought of implied or hypothetical consent when making decisions about procreation.
If you've got somebody, let's say, who's unconscious on the street, you can't access their wishes because they're unconscious. And in fact, you don't even need to work on the basis of hypothetical consent, that they would have consented if they could have. It might be sufficient that it's likely in their best interests for you to administer treatment. So think about not cases of adults who are lying on the street, but newborn babies who require medical treatment. Consent makes no sense in a context like this, because this child couldn't give consent even if it were fully conscious. It couldn't give consent as a child. There's no preferences of this being to access, but the standard that we normally use in scenarios like this is what's called the best interest standard. So you do what is going to be in the best interests of somebody. And if this is an already existing being, it's likely in their interest to continue existing, unless that's outweighed, let's say, by the suffering that they're going to endure. And that's what would justify the treatment. But if you're speaking about a being that has not been brought into existence,
yeah, then there is no best interest to appeal to, I assume is what he's going to say.
It suffers no harm if it's not brought into existence. And so the idea that you're now going to benefit this being by creating the being is completely disanalogous from the other kinds of case.
Many people, many of the viewers are going to be asking themselves, well, I've experienced so many things in my life. You know, I've had good things, I've had bad things, and maybe tomorrow I'll get a terminal diagnosis, or I'll get hit by a bus or something more horrific, like some kind of liver problem that takes years and it's, you know, terrible death. And they would say, I'm okay with that. Why is that not justification to create a new life?
Well, think about somebody who genetically engineered a contented slave. So they decided that they would...
This is a bit like the video I did on Stockholm Syndrome, you know? So a couple of videos back, I did a video on basically why people who are glad to be born are essentially suffering from a form of Stockholm Syndrome. And yeah, what's his face? Aldous Huxley talks about this, you know, and obviously in his famous work, Brave New World, it's like he talks about how people essentially become happy to be oppressed. You know, they're happy in their servitude, in their slavehood. And they're happy in situations where if they were clear thinking, they, you know, they wouldn't be happy. But they're under the influence of such intoxicating biases or indoctrination or whatever that yeah, they say they are glad to be in such a situation where actually they, you know, if they were thinking rationally, they wouldn't be glad to be in that situation. Obviously, sometimes it's kind of tricky to make these arguments because it can be accused of like paternalism, of like, you know, who are you to say I'm not being rational, or who are you to say that I'm intoxicated on X, Y, Z or whatever. Maybe, you know, we're mistaken about the situation and we think they're they're sort of like have a Stockholm Syndrome when actually we're under the influence of some sort of bias, which is making us think that about them. So it's sometimes a tricky argument to make, but it's at the very least an interesting thing to put forward, and probably something that you'd have to empirically test to understand who is actually suffering from more of a bias.
Produce a child, but they do some genetic engineering on the child that they implant, on the embryo that they implant, such that this person who's produced will be a servile, but a contentedly servile person. So they've been engineered to be this way. Would it be morally acceptable to produce a class of contented slaves? I think very few of us would say that it is. And that is because the life of a slave is not a good life. And the fact that it is sort of genetically adapted to being happy in that condition would not provide us with a license to produce that slave. And I think that what's going on in procreation is we don't have human genetic alteration of the beings that come into existence. But what we have is an evolutionarily constructed genome, as it were, that is going to incline people towards accepting their condition, their human condition.
Yeah, this is what I talk about in my video on Stockholm Syndrome, is that, you know, it's not a totalitarian regime that we're suffering under, but a sort of evolutionary regime that we're suffering under.
And I don't think the fact that people endorse this makes it justifiable. So the suggestion was that although you're bringing this child into existence without the child's consent, if the child turns out not to be happy with his or her life, they've always got the choice of taking their own lives, of engaging in suicide. And they found the idea that you'd want to avoid somebody having to make that decision as morally monstrous. And I think the opposite is morally monstrous. I think it underestimates a few things. First of all, it underestimates lots of people's access to painless suicide, painless and effective suicide. So it may be that in some parts of the world now, some states in the US and in Canada and a few other places, Switzerland, that you can get access to medically assisted dying, and it can be a relatively painless and effective procedure. But there are many other people who are going to have to choose some alternative self-administered way of suicide.
Yeah, and it's often people like brutalizing themselves.
And it might be either ineffective or it might be painful. And so it's not a real option that everybody has. And secondly, even if you do have the option of medically assisted suicide, given the life drive that people have, you have to reach immense levels of pain, psychic pain, before you're going to take your life. And even then, you're going to be racked with concerns about what you would do to people who leave behind. This is an immensely weighty decision. And to put somebody into a position like that is vastly different from not creating them in the first place. But you've now asked me about this person who's unconscious and needs help. And I don't think that that is an analogy for the procreation case. Because when you have an unconscious person, they already exist. And they have an interest in continuing to exist. And so when you administer that help to them, you're doing what is likely in their best interests. Whereas when you're contemplating procreation, there's not a being that exists there. And if I'm correct about the asymmetry argument, the axiological asymmetry argument, it's not in their interest to come into existence. And that's the fundamental disanalogy between the rescue case and the case of procreation.
So, who are the people who have properly addressed Benatar's version of antinatalism? I did some research and discovered Christine Overall, who wrote the book Why Have Children? She dedicated an entire
I still need to read that book.
Chapter to Benatar's arguments. And would she make me feel better about my decision to have 3 children? Can I encourage my daughters in good faith to start families of their own? Overall offers up a thought experiment where half the people on a planet, 5 million to be exact, are happy and 5 million are suffering. In this scenario, an angel petitions God to fix the situation. In her first scenario, God recreates everyone to not suffer, and the angel is pleased. But then she posits God could have alternatively rolled back time and not created anyone. This is obviously what she sees anti-natalism as, rolling back time and not creating anyone. She states that the angel would be displeased with this option. But I would say that the thought experiment falls flat, because undoing or rolling back the creation of a life is not fundamentally different from murder. Like, if someone said they could roll back time and have me not created, I think I'd feel about the same as if they were trying to end my life, because to me, it's the same outcome. And she does bring this contention up in the book, but I think the thought experiment only seems morally repulsive because the angel witnesses the non-creation of the previously created 10 million people. Overall, waffles her way out of the problem on paper.
Yeah, often when you're talking about if someone were never born, and you're talking about a particular person who has actually been born, it's so difficult for many people to actually understand what's being said. They almost always think of it as them being killed or their life ending, because it's extremely hard to get past all of the things you've become attached to. The relationships, the places, the memories, the TV shows you love, the culture you're part of. All these things we are fundamentally deeply attached to. And it's extremely hard when someone says, what if you were never born? It's extremely hard to look past all those things, right? And make a rational assessment and understand that actually if you were never born, you simply wouldn't have existed to even be aware of all of those things that you value as someone who does exist. Which makes it extremely hard for people who do exist to make judgments about this thing, which is often why it's hard to have a rational conversation with someone about anti-natalism.
Age 100, she creates a situation where there is no God. An unexplained mystery of the cosmos warps back in time and does not create the 10 million people. The problem is the reader interprets rolling back time and not creating the 10 million people as essentially killing them. They existed in one scenario, and now they don't. Whether it's God or an unexplained mystery, people being uncreated is not the same as never existing. And despite my bias to want overall to find a contradiction in Benatar's logic, I didn't find a good argument in her book. I'll spare you from going through all of her objections, but in my humble opinion, she just doesn't understand Benatar. The worst defense is when she cites an argument that one of her students created. Imagine a bag of jelly beans with 2 flavors. one you hate and one you love. You don't know the proportions of the bag, and you are given a choice. Reach in and you must eat them, or don't. I think you can see where this is going. Life has suffering, the black licorice, and life has pleasure, the normal jelly beans. I intuitively just don't even agree with this thought experiment. Nobody would take the challenge. I hate black licorice, and if I had to eat even one in a handful, it wouldn't be worth it. But I wanted to see what my family thought.
Wait, so do we have to eat the whole thing of whatever we get?
Yes. So here's the deal. You're forced to start the game, but you can opt out if you want to.
No, I'm not opting out. I'm doing this.
All right, Lily, you want to go first?
Oh, no. I have to eat all of it?
I feel like you got like a mix maybe, or what? So, start eating.
Wish me luck.
And obviously this is like a funny and sort of wholesome way of making the point, but obviously the point being made is that with this whole jelly bean analogy, it's an existing person who can make a decision for themselves. It's not being forced on someone else. And obviously the matter is trivial, like eating some jelly beans, like, okay, you're going to eat one that you don't like, but like get over it. Whereas in the case of creating someone, the stakes are much, much higher.
Are you just going to get that over with?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Both of your plates could be entirely licorice.
Oh.
So Lily, so you're not having a very good time over there.
Nothing great. What are you talking about?
She's powering through.
Now, let me ask you this. If you could start over and not play this game, would you choose that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you would choose not to? Okay. You're not glad to have played the game?
Oh,
Yeah.
dear.
No? Okay.
So would you recommend this game to someone else? No.
I see what's happening here.
All right, Mommy. What do you have? Go ahead and lift up. Just Mommy.
Right, but
What'd
why?
you
Let's go.
Like mostly licorice.
Oh, no.
And you said I don't have to play this game.
Yeah, do you want to just opt out?
Yeah, I don't want to do this.
Okay, Mommy's opting out.
Well, can I have these though?
Not for the video, but...
Spit it out!
So, Lily, you're technically opting out. Is that okay? I mean, it's fine. You don't lose any points. You just opt out. Okay.
I'm doing this.
Okay,
I'm doing
Aubrey,
it.
Like, no matter
let's
what?
see yours.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have?
I mean, someone had to have a good ratio, right?
What do you have? Show me. Show me. Oh, yeah. It's like mostly... How many actual licorice do you have?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, so it's mostly jelly beans. But again, if you're going to eat the jelly beans, you got to eat the licorice, okay? Okay, do you think this is a worthwhile deal?
So far, yeah, it's great.
If you had to play this game again, I were to mix these cups up and...
Why is everyone hating on licorice as well? That's such a good place to stop the video. But why is everyone hating on licorice? I really like licorice. I don't know if I'm in the minority. Okay, we've got 71 people watching right now. That's a good amount of people to do a straw poll with. So put in the chat now, if you like licorice, put a 1. If you don't like licorice, put a 2. Because... yeah, I want to see what people think. I could do a poll, but I can't be bothered to put a poll for something this trivial. But I really like licorice. Not all forms of licorice, but classic licorice I really like.
And you could get... if you had to play this game again, and you could get a plate full of the black licorice like Mommy, would you play this game?
Oh, we've got some two. Oh, we've got mostly 2s coming in. We've only got 1. Clone Granny, first of all, welcome to the chat, but second of all, you got some good taste there. Void Document, what a lad. Or actually, I don't know if you're a lad, but what a legend. Or a ladette. Oh, we've got some more 2s, oh dear. Fleeting Twilight saying they always like them. Foiled Chip saying they like licorice. John's in there with the 1. Welcome to the chat, John. Welcome to the chat, Jeffrey, as well. Welcome to the chat, Aya, as well. I didn't say hello to you, I don't think. Okay, so we've got a bit of a mix.
Again, if you had to eat everything. No. Interesting. Would you recommend someone else play this game?
If it was my enemy, then yeah, I'd be like, this is so fun.
This is so funny because like the way they're making their judgments now is exactly how pessimists make judgments about life. I mean, not about wishing it on your worst enemy. Maybe some pessimists do, but you get what I mean. So it's quite funny. I wonder, obviously, him and his wife, you know, sort of, I don't know how much he briefed them before this. So like, it seems like his wife kind of cottoned on, but I presume for a genuine reaction, he didn't tell his daughters about how he's going to use this in the narrative of the film. So that's quite interesting.
But not someone that I like.
Yeah. Okay. Apparently, my entire family would have been better off had the experiment never been. But then I found David Boonin, a philosopher who has written extensively on a range of controversial moral issues. He wrote a paper in response to Benatar titled Better to Be. He writes in the first page, Benatar's fundamental claim is difficult to believe. It arises from an admirably simple and ingenious argument whose premises are not only plausible, but difficult to deny. Intriguing. This was my first thought as well. Boonin uses an example of a blessed couple and a cursed couple. The blessed couple can produce a child with a wonderful life full of only pleasure, and the cursed couple would produce a child with a life completely
so this is like the example I was talking about before with the couple with hereditary diseases.
Filled with pain and suffering, absent of pleasure. Our intuition is that it would be wrong to create the cursed child, but people do not object to the blessed couple choosing to just not procreate. If you agree with these moral intuitions, Benatar's asymmetry explains why this is the case. But what do we do about a lucky child? Boonin defines a lucky child as a life filled with mostly pleasure and happiness, but does contain a small amount of pain and suffering. According to Benatar, the lucky child is better to have never been, because a non-existent child cannot be deprived of pleasure. Again, our moral intuition is that it's not wrong for the blessed couple to not have the blessed child. So there's nothing wrong in a lucky child missing out on the pleasures that they might experience.
And even the phrase, like phraseology of missing out there is kind of misleading. And I'm obviously Tim wouldn't have done this on purpose, because it's like, you know, the phraseology of missing out implies there's someone to be missing out on it, and it's kind of like a negative connotation. But it would be the case that there would simply be no one who exists to desire these, you know, things that we're referencing.
But in the case of the lucky child, any pain and suffering the child experiences will harm the child. And this could have been avoided by never conceiving. Boonin summarizes Benatar's conclusion. And since your life and my life contains at least some pain as well, you and I were harmed by being conceived too. We would all have been better off never having been. Finally, someone who actually understands Benatar. But how does he get around Benatar's asymmetry? He writes, one way to object to Benatar's argument then would be to identify an alternative principle that does an even better job of explaining the asymmetry and that produces a different result in the case of the lucky couple. And so he modifies Benatar's argument. If the absence of pain can be better than the presence of pain, even when there is no actual person who enjoys the absence of pain, that is, then the absence of pleasure can be worse than the presence of pleasure, even when there is no actual person who is deprived of the absent pleasure.
Oh, wait, I just need to go back so I can read that myself. So if the absence of pain can be better than the presence of pain, even when there is no actual person who enjoys that is, then the absence of pleasure can be worse than the presence of pleasure. Okay. So he's basically just saying, like, make it symmetrical rather than asymmetrical.
He creates what he calls the relational symmetry principle. Boonin argues that since a person would not exist without procreation, they cannot be harmed by being brought into existence. Harm requires a comparative state where...
Wait, hang on a minute. Let me just...
Benatar's argument. If the absence of pain can...
hang on a minute.
Pleasure, even when there is no actual person who is deprived of the absent pleasure. He creates what he calls the relational symmetry principle.
Bunin argues that since a person would not exist without procreation, they cannot be harmed by being brought into existence.
Since they wouldn't exist without procreation, they cannot be harmed by being brought into existence.
Harm requires a comparative state where the person is worse off. But this doesn't apply when the alternative is...
I don't understand how that's related to the first quote that Tim pulled out the paper. Because if I'm understanding correctly, the first quote that he pulled out was essentially rejecting an asymmetrical value judgment of the goods and bads and put forward a symmetrical judgment or evaluation, which is separate from saying that you can't compare between an existing person and them never existing. Maybe I'm wrong. If I'm misunderstanding and someone is understanding and understanding how I'm misunderstanding, then please put it in the chat. But I feel like there's two different things being discussed here.
Non-existence. Moreover, Bunin criticized...
I've heard people say this all the time. I mean, in the what do you call it? In the the live stream I just did recently about responding to the leftist cooks video essay. The guy in that was constantly saying how, you know, Benatar's arguments are invalid because you can't compare someone who exists with, you know, non-existence, which to me is like, you know, I can maybe understand how you can sort of like philosophize your way into that. But like, in reality, we actually do it all the time and it makes complete sense to. So we do it all the time when talking about future generations and like how we impact them with, you know, climate change and stuff like this. We make judgments about this all the time. Like in the example I said, you know, if you have a hereditary disease and you know the child you're going to create is going to have an awful life, you can compare two counterfactual scenarios, one where X exists and has that horrible life and X doesn't exist. The fact that someone doesn't exist in one of the two possible worlds doesn't mean you can't compare the two possible worlds with regards to the interests of the person. With their interest in the world where they do exist. And I even took a quote from, I even showed a quote from one of Benatar's papers, Still Better Never to Have Been, where he speaks about this and makes this point. I don't know if Tim's going to bring it up, but let's just see if anyone in the chat has actually said if I'm misunderstanding or not. Doesn't look like anyone has. I mean, if anyone thinks I am misunderstanding, please say, but let's keep going.
Emphasizes Benatar's asymmetry between pain and pleasure, advocating instead for a relational symmetry that treats the absence of pleasure as similarly bad as the presence of pain, depending on the context of the actual person's interests. The problem with this modification is that the blessed couple, who remains childless, is depriving their future child of pleasure by remaining childless. Because if the absence of pleasure is bad, in the same way that the presence of pain is bad, not having the blessed child is also bad, right? Bunin writes, if the blessed couple decides to conceive the blessed child, for example, then things will be better from the point of view of the interests of the blessed child, and the blessed child will therefore not be made worse off by the decision. If the blessed couple decides not to conceive the blessed child, then things will be worse from the point of view of the interests of the blessed child. But the blessed child will not exist, and so will not be an actual person who has been made worse off by the decision. Regardless of which choice the blessed couple makes, then no actual person will be made worse off by their decision. But what about the lucky child? The child with mostly pleasure and a small amount of suffering. Bunin's...
So which child was that? So, okay, blessed child.
The blessed child will not exist, and so will not be an actual person who has been made worse off by the decision. Regardless of which choice the blessed couple makes, then no actual person will be made worse off by their decision. But what about the lucky child? The child with mostly pleasure and a small amount of suffering. Bunin's version of Benatar's asymmetry states, since the total amount of pleasure outweighs the total amount of pain, in this case, the magnitude of the advantage that existence has over non-existence is greater than the magnitude of the advantage of non-existence has over existence.
Yeah, so then you get on to the quality of life argument, which, I mean, Benatar does present, and I'm making a video about. But it'd be interesting to see what Bunin says for the positive account.
And so, Bunin has provided an alternative argument as to how the blessed couple...
I mean, to me, it just doesn't fundamentally make sense. You're creating someone and subjecting them to suffering for pleasures that they never existed to want in the first place. It just makes no sense. Yeah, I just, I don't get it.
Isn't committing harm by not having a child, while at the same time, the lucky couple isn't committing a moral harm by having a child who will still experience pain and suffering. There are several problems with Bunin's arguments, though, such as nobody knows what's going to happen before conceiving a child. You don't know if you are the unlucky couple where your child's life is not mostly pleasure. And according to Benatar, we underestimate the amount of pain in our lives and we overestimate the pleasure we received. But if perception is reality, does it really matter? In It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey actually said two things. I suppose it would have been better if I'd never been born at all.
I suppose it'd been better if I'd never been born at all.
And I wish I had never been born.
I said I wish I'd never been born.
The movie may have proved the world was better off with George in it. He saved his brother's life. He stopped the local pharmacist from accidentally poisoning a child. And when his father died of a sudden stroke, George sacrificed his lifelong dreams to run his family business. By doing so, he helped keep the business open to provide affordable loans to working class people. And during the Great Depression, when a bank run threatens the building and loan, George uses the money he had saved for his honeymoon with Mary to keep the business afloat. And so you could say the world was better off with George in it. But what about George? If George never existed, he wouldn't have needed to sacrifice his dream to save his family business. He didn't have a dream to sacrifice. He didn't have to jump into the icy water, going deaf in one ear to save his brother. He didn't have a brother. And he didn't need to remedy a bank run during the Great Depression. The Great Depression wouldn't exist for him. The film doesn't examine the counterfactual. A world where a Hollywood scriptwriter doesn't pencil in a happy ending with a guardian angel. But I'm sure at this point, you are all curious as to what my conclusion is after this journey.
I was actually starting to think that.
Am I an anti-natalist? I will tell you this. I don't plan on having any more children. However, I wasn't planning on having any more children when I started this project over a half a year ago. My conclusion around anti-natalism is complicated. I believe that many families mindlessly bring children into the world for wrong reasons. But on the other hand, I would encourage my daughters to start families of their own. And as for the intro quote, I do believe there are almost an infinite number of ways to mess things up. I worry about what can go wrong and does go wrong for families all over the world. But I think the best way to summarize my overall feeling is this letter I found from Micro of Dirty Jobs. He was writing in response to someone asking why he decided to not become a parent. And here's what he said. The question is certainly
It's a letter from who?
Micro of Dirty Jobs. He was
Micro of Dirty Jobs. I don't know what that is.
Writing in response to someone asking why he decided to not become a parent. And here's what he said. The question is certainly personal and hard to answer without casting a subtle judgment on a certain lifestyle and probably offending a few people. But what the heck, it's a foggy morning in San Francisco and I'm feeling verbose and I'm quite sure that a staggering number of moms and dads have no business being parents. As institutions, I have no problem with marriage or parenthood and I enjoy kids when they're enjoyable, but the relative ease into which parenthood can be accomplished is breathtaking, especially when you consider the conspicuous lack of qualifications required. Every other undertaking in life demands some level of proven competence or maturity, from driving a car to owning a gun to casting a vote to having a drink to building a garage on your own property. Such things require licenses, permits, and permissions, but not raising kids. No. The most difficult task a human being can embark upon, the lifelong commitment of parenthood, requires no qualification whatsoever. And yet, the default question regarding having kids is always, why not? And not as the original poster suggests, the far more logical, why? Personally, I've never heard a really compelling, thoughtful argument for or against parenthood. All positions, when closely examined, reveal the clever workings of our true nature. Our minds are wired to justify and defend those decisions already made, or more often, our own pre-existing condition. This is normal, I think. People with families want to feel good about their decision to have kids, and people without kids don't want to feel as though they missed out. No one likes regret. So to preserve the illusion of our own wisdom and sanity, we build apologetics around our current situation and define the road not taken in a way that justifies our current state. Thus, I find myself looking at my married friends, haggard and worn, surrounded by their screaming toddlers and their petulant teenagers, ungrateful and sullen, and I feel a great sense of personal relief. Likewise, my married friends probably see me as a sad and misguided vagabond who has confused freedom with happiness and destined to wind up alone in a cold, indifferent world. Whatever. Envy and pity are often two sides of the same coin, depending on the kind of day you're having, and we all spend too much time looking for validation and assurances that we haven't botched up our one chance at happiness. In the end, we all just want to feel content with the life we have. So we gravitate towards those who share our choices and look with curiosity upon those who do not. We validate, we affirm, we reassure, and we add another page to a made-up story that helps us live with the consequences of our decisions and answer questions like, Mike, why no kids? Here's my answer. My reasoning for not having kids is due to the fact that I am selfish. And if I ever change my mind and decide to have a family, my reasoning will be the same. Either way, it's a dirty job. Hey everyone, I want to make more videos, but I struggle with the monetization side of things. I don't want to have...
That we will play the outro, but I thought that was an interesting ending. He was basically saying, like, essentially people are going to do what they're going to do, and their reasons for it are, you know, usually unfounded and self-serving. But I got the impression that he kind of fell on the side of being more sympathetic to the arguments of anti-natalism, but maybe just being resistant to seeing them actually play out. Although I'm sure he would not, regret if his daughters decided of their own free choice not to have children. And he would be happy, for whatever makes them happy. But yeah, I kind of get that impression that, I mean, I might be wrong. And obviously, I'm biased towards wanting him to agree with me. But I kind of get the impression he was actually sympathetic to the anti-natalist arguments. But who do I know? Who do I know? What do I know?
Brand advertising. And YouTube has a tendency to demonetize the type of content I make. So if you'd like to join me and help me grow this channel, I'd love for you to join my Patreon community. I have a bunch of ideas, which I will post on the Patreon page. You don't have to be a member to see this, so I invite you to check it out. I want to do one-on-one sessions, live Q&As, gaming nights. I have 100 ideas floating around right now. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next video.
So that was it. If you do want to support Tim, then the link to the original video is in the description of this live, and that will take you to the video, and I'm sure you can find everything you need there in the description of the original video. But what did people think of that? How did people find that video or documentary? I actually really enjoyed that. I thought it was very balanced. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was balanced. He showed the opinions of both sides. Obviously, he gave more attention to the anti-natalist side than the pro-natalist side. I think that was because I think originally the idea was to was to do a video on anti-natalism, and most people are just passively through existing exposed to the pro-natalist side. So you want to give more light or attention to the side that people are less likely to be familiar with. I'm just putting a poll. There, I'm starting a poll now. So let's vote. What did you think of the doc? Great or not so great? Personally, I thought it was good. I thought he gave a balanced view. It was very interesting, the different people he pulled on. I thought, the narrative was very good. The progression. I really liked, him exploring the ideas in creative ways, like with the jelly beans and stuff. Yeah, that was all really cool. So I don't know if Tim is going to watch this, or if he's going to get this far. But yeah, great work. I thought it was really good. I enjoyed helping out in the early stages with having a chat. Yeah, really, really good. And honestly, if someone wanted an introduction to anti-natalism, I would actually probably send them this. I mean, the only downside is that it is an hour and a half, but honestly, I don't think that would put an insane amount of people off. People are pretty willing to, if they want to explore an idea, going on Netflix and putting on a documentary about it. If they know it's an hour and a half, they get a good overview. This is basically the same thing, but on YouTube, right? And it's not an official documentary. We've got 65 people watching and only 23 votes. So quickly cash in your thoughts in the poll, and then I'll end the poll and we'll see the results. But so far it's looking pretty good. Let's say hello to a few people. So Brian's in the chat. Superglue's in the chat. Hello. I don't think I've said hello to either of you. Yulsamore is in the chat. Welcome. Linda's in the chat. Back at it, Linda. Welcome. Manira, welcome to the chat. I think that's everyone. Aditya, welcome to the chat. I think that's everyone new. I can't see anyone else new. Cool. All right, we're going to end the poll there. Let's see what the results are. And it was 100% for the documentary was great, and 0 votes for not so great. So I'm glad everyone agrees. Yeah, great work to Tim. Should we actually? I was just thinking, actually, instead of ending the stream there, should we have a look at some of the comments? Let me get up the video again. And we can look at some of the comments. Let's have a look. Oh,
Sentence on them.
Okay, let me get to the. Okay, here we go. Let me switch. Okay, here we go. So this is the comment section of the video. So you've got my comment there. I left a comment. You've got Kartik, who sometimes pops up in the in my live stream. So if you're watching now, nice one, Kartik. So I mean, Kartik's obviously sympathetic. We've got Gemrich. I'm blown away by how smart your girls are. You and your wife have done a great job raising them. I personally chose to get the snippet in all relationships, make it clear from the beginning I do not intend to be a father. No. I want to see if there are any more pro-natalist people. Okay, so let's see if Blake has a different perspective. So Blake says, all right, so here's a different perspective. I'm 33. I've been disabled with chronic pain for the last 8+ years, life stripped away. I was a 6'5" athlete in college. who was graduated with honors. Literally nothing was going to stop me from being the best and enjoying life. Now fast forward to now, I'm miserable, I hate existing, I pray, I die every day, and yet even with all that suffering and misery, I would be a fool to think that my existence is the same as someone else's. What if I was born as a kid of the Walton family, a massive generational wealth and literally every opportunity available to them? And I'll do you one better. What if you're born with a passion for helping those who are suffering to escape from it? Think angel fund investors or missionaries in horrible places on earth plagued by war. And as someone who's been to this place on missionary trips, I can tell you that people with literally nothing still have so much joy to live. I could go on, but I think that that's the majority of my thoughts. Fantastic video. Love how well you addressed both sides and did a great job asking very real and reasonable questions. God bless. Cool. I didn't really take as much away from that as I thought I would, but yeah, obviously people in different circumstances, even if we perceive those circumstances as shit, those people can actually have a relatively good, they can make the best of a bad situation. And so we maybe not be standing on firm ground to say their lives are worse than ours. So yeah, I agree with that. I don't think that's a reason to create people, but then we've got John. John, who's been on the channel several times. Wonderful balanced videos on a complicated and controversial topic. Nice work. Cool. Okay. I don't think we are going to go through many more comments because, yeah, it wasn't as fruitful as I thought. But I just want to say again, thank you everyone for watching this along with me. It was interesting to see a video that I've sort of, I mean, I'm not trying to blow my contribution out of proportion at all. I had one conversation with the guy, but it was interesting to be at the start of, because like he said, I was the first anti-natalist YouTuber he came across, and we had a conversation. It was interesting to see his interest at the start of that, have a conversation with him, and then wait a bunch of time and then see what the final product comes out as. And I sort of exchanged a couple of messages with him over the past few months, just asking like how things are going. And it was just very interesting for him to relay that, you know, the idea is getting more complicated and growing into a larger thing as time goes on. So it was interesting to like hear that going along and then see the actual final product. But anyway, I think that is everything. We have been going for, how long have we been going for now? Like over 3 hours, I think. Jesus Christ. But thank you everyone for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. Well done, Tim, again. And I guess I will see everyone in the next stream, which is going to be on Friday, where we're watching Adventures of an Anti-Natalist, a video series or a cartoon series on anti-natalism. Or the experiences of an anti-natalist fictional character by Glinos, if any of you know him. So I hope everyone's looking forward to that for Friday. I will see you there. And I was about to say catch everyone in the next one, but I've just been talking about the next one. So I'll catch everyone at the Adventures of an Anti-Natalist live stream reaction.